I've been teaching posing now for my whole teaching career. It's been, 18 years since I've been teaching, and I've been talking about posing. I'm obsessed with posing, and I break it down into a fine science and then simplify it for those who want to learn it very, very simply. And although you may have come to my workshop before, you may have seen me talk about hand posing, and I'll cover some of those points again, but I've gone a lot deeper today, and I will go a lot deeper because hands can be such a beautiful thing. They could make a photograph, they can break a photograph, they can be expressive, they can just be a nothing. As in, they don't really make a positive message or negative impact, they're just there. As I was going through photographs, and I realized that I practice what I preach. I'm really content on making sure that every part of an image helps express what I'm trying to say to the viewer of the photograph. And here's the thing, I want to talk about this thing right now, because we're talking about rules, okay, rules. And when we say rules, then everyone gets a little bit funny about it, thinking, well, can I break them? And we all know the old adage that you have to know the rules before you break them and all that kind of stuff. And there's certainly truth to that, but here is the thing. I like to think of rules more as guides and common denominators. In other words, I've been photographing now for so long, and I've made so many mistakes, probably more than I've got it right. And all I can say is that after this many years of shooting, I believe what I'm about to share with you now are the common denominators on what works most of the time. Now you might say, well, what does that mean most of the time? Well, there's no absolutes, because what one will perceive as a negative or wrong, it could be quite expressive. So we really have to understand that as well. And here's the thing, and I hate to say this, but I can do this. You can judge a photographer's skill based upon how well they pose female hands. Most people don't really pose guys' hands. Normally we get him to put his hand in his pocket or cross his arms, and we'll talk about that at a live broadcast. But I'm telling you now that I know someone who pay attention to detail based upon hands, because like I said, photographers dismiss hands as all too difficult, or perhaps they don't know what to do with the hands, therefore they'll get the bride to hold the flowers all day, maybe one hand around the groom or whatever it may be. And I'm telling you now that it's important that we understand that hands can be extremely expressive, and we just have to know what to do with them. And I'm going to break it down considerably, more than I ever have. I'm telling you now, I've broken it down into different sections, and I'm going to give you these common denominators to what I believe is the best way of doing it, and you'll see how it goes. Now, I want to remind you that emotion beats perfection. Because quite simply, in real life, even the way I'm gesturing right now, it may not be perfectly the way I would pose a guy, because quite simply, in real life, we do certain things. And obviously for a guy, there's probably different common denominators, guides. For girls, there's also different ones. And quite simply, there are many things that we want to do. But I'm just saying is emotion beats perfection. What is wrong with this photograph? The first thing you see, oh my God, it's in Paris, how beautiful, fantastic. We've compressed the background, we've got rid of all the actual, all the crap in the foreground, we've shot down low, up high, beautiful expression, nice hands there, all that kind of stuff. But what is wrong? What is the weird thing about this photograph? Let me talk about the left hand, which is actually really, really beautiful. The left hand in this image, there's a slight little bend in the wrist. It's committing to what's happening. It's engaging without being forceful. It's soft and it's tender, and it's really beautiful. Now, here's the problem. I posed them beautifully, and you might say, well, what happened? This arm wasn't even visible. Then what happened is, in the heat of the battle and making them laugh, she pulled her elbow back. I caught the expression, and unfortunately, it looks really freaking weird. You've got like this big man hand on this girly arm, so to speak. Now, there's a couple of things. Obviously, if I was to redo this and try to maintain the expression, I may not get the expression, but have the hands perfect. So I took the photograph. I forgave myself. And certainly, I can just crop that crap out, and you wouldn't have a problem. But if I was to redo it and I can maintain the expression, that hand here, and you would often hear me say that a groom's hand should not cover up the thinnest part of the waist. because it's a waste of a waist, okay? You want to see that beautiful curve, that beautiful small of a back that us guys are obsessed with women. So thank you so much for that. So that hand, now what did I say? Now usually you've heard me say that good lighting, good posing is either flattering and or it helps communicate the message that you're trying to convey to the viewer. In this case, you wouldn't call it as flattering because we're not really showing off the thinnest part of the waist, but what it's communicating is he's drawing her body close to him, and that's where he wants to put his hand, so therefore that's fine. But to the letter of the law, his hand probably should go up, and arguably at least we get that line, that bend off his hand, and or we get that elbow in a little bit, and or we get rid of it. So they're the kinds of things that we should look out for. And that brings us to that point that I just explained to you. A good pose is either flattering and or it helps communicate the desired message from the artist to the viewer. Now, what is art, guys? Art is a form of communication. It's either music, it's dance, it's painting, it's sculpture, it's anything that communicates a feeling. So if you communicate more effectively with what you do with female hands, guess what? You are more of an artist. And that's what I'm getting at, is if you want to be more artistic, you are wasting this beautiful expressive digits of a hand. And in my case, I have 9 2/3. And that's why I'm so particular in posing fingers. And for those of you who don't know, yes, I am missing my left index finger, or at least part of it. But and I did that so it can help me remember to pose fingers more effectively. But you want to be more of an artist. You want to be more of an artist, so you've got to communicate better. So guys, next time you shoot a wedding or a portrait or whatever, say something with those hands. And it doesn't have to be much. Sometimes it could just be delicate. It could be soft. It could be forceful. It could be strong. It could be romantic. It could be sexy. Pick one. What do you think of the hands here? Would you call that traditionally beautifully posed hands and that thumb coming out of nowhere? Well, it's funny, when this model came into the studio, I think she was about 15, and she was like a little mouse, or a little stray mouse, and any little sound will just frighten her away. And I ended up using that because I'm like, how am I going to break this girl down? How am I going to make her comfortable and relax in front of my camera? And I thought, I want to use that. She's an awkward teenager that doesn't really know herself yet. And it's funny, ever since I've been following her on Instagram, and it's weird because she just has that wallflower, what do you call that? Wallflower?
Yeah, wallflower.
Wallflower type of personality. She's just finding the world right now, and she's just awkward, but it makes her beautiful. So I wanted her to like act as if she was crying and she's a little bit angry. And I said, just grab your elbows very just strong, awkward, or whatever I said. I can't remember what I said exactly, but that communicates something. Therefore, that's nicely posed hands, because I'm actually executing my desired result to you, the viewer. And that's the whole idea. And as I've pretty much implied already, that after the eyes, the hands are the most expressive part of the body. So use those hands. And so what you'll see in quotes are pretty much my common denominators, because I find that, I can just be very loose and just give you some general advice, but I find that especially if you're starting out at home, you might not really understand or know where to start. And maybe these common denominators, that if you take them a little, maybe more literally, at least to start off with, I think that'll be a good guide and start for you. And then as you go along in your journey as an artist, you'll understand that when it's okay to do something like that, because it expresses something. It doesn't always have to be flattering, because not every image is supposed to make the person look beautiful and feel beautiful. It could just be about expressing something. Like in this case, you see how her hands are an extension of the wings, so it's all fluid. It all just flows up very, very beautifully, and there's a very beautiful softness to those hands. So I guess what we're saying, guys, is this. Hands should be engaged. Engaged means you're doing something with them. It's not just doing nothing. And even free hands doing nothing, as in just loosely by your side, can express something, which we'll show you later on. I want them purposeful, because I want you to say something with them and be relaxed but never stiff. Now, it's tough, because what we're saying is that we're clashing cymbals with our knees, we're playing the harmonica, we're banging the drum and all that kind of stuff. Can we coordinate all this and make sense? At the end of the day, let your gut and instinct be your guide. If you think something looks a little bit weird, something's not quite right, well, trust your gut. Something's probably not right, and then you can go for it accordingly. So in this case, you can see how that proves my exact point. It's engaged, it's purposeful. The inspiration behind this shot was my grandmother, who most Greek grandmothers will wear she's a widow, and she was a widow, of course, and then she would wear that black little granny thing that you not often would see. And the inspiration behind her pose was actually Mona Lisa. If you have a separate tab without getting out of this broadcast, just double click it, do a Google on Mona Lisa, look at an image of the Mona Lisa, and you'll see how many similarities there are to that particular image as well. Before we go on with some common denominators and then showing you many examples to back what I'm basically saying up, is that I actually want to show you some general principles with Melissa, and then we can actually prove our point, like I said, with some imagery.
It's pretty cool. I guess what you're stressing here is that, there are rules and then there are rules, but in art, there's never any absolute rules. And although we're talking about principles, the thing to remember throughout this whole seminar is that these rules are not absolute. They're more like just guidelines that you should follow, and there are reasons why you will sometimes break those rules. So never be too inflexible that you can't experiment and express yourself in different ways.
Love that. Never be too inflexible. That's awesome. All right, baby girl, come in this way. Hope you got a manicure recently.
I know. Thank goodness.
All right. Isn't it fun that we're in the same camera view? Every blue moon we're in the same camera view. So, all right, guys. So when we talk about hands, are we in the right position, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, not too bad. Okay. So when we talk about hands, we can't really avoid talking about forearm, arm, and shoulders and so on. So the first thing that we've got to do, especially with the female form, is you want to bring the shoulders back. When you bring the shoulders back, what happens? The bust becomes more pronounced, and also we eliminate those little pinches of skin that hang over the breast. Little ticklish there. I'm touching her because I can. All right, so shoulders back are really, really important. Also, you never want to have the arm directly on the body. So if the arm is directly on the body, if she was hidden, let's say there's flowers in the way, or there's the guy's jacket in the way, or perspective or cropping or shadow, that's okay. Or if she's really, really skinny. And even then, you'll find very rarely even skinny girls with really thin arms are happy with their arms not looking big, but they're looking flat. So that's a bit of a no-no. So girls watching at home, you know what I'm talking about. You hate that when your arms look flat or big, and that's just a fact. So we got to know that. So give her an excuse to do something with her arm off her body. If we're talking about a wedding, then what we want to do is give her an excuse. As we said, we can actually get her to hold the groom's arm like this. We could hold hands. We could put the hand on the hip. We could actually hold the flowers, hold the champagne glass, hold earrings. We could be touching her veil, adjusting her veil, holding the veil out in the air, and so on and so forth. So give her an excuse to be doing something with her hands is what I'm getting at. And I'm going to show you many, many, many different examples in a moment about how to pose hands and things like that as well. Okay. Also, what we want to do is we never want to basically be able to see this, because this is a flat part of the body and it's wider. When I talk about posing, you just simply want to show the thinnest part of any body part of a woman. Think of it like that. So this is going to be thicker and flatter. We don't want that. And we also don't want this. I don't know how much we can see there, Joe, but we also don't want to basically see that bit. So if we have a choice, and if you can, and whilst not ruining the emotion, you want to basically shoot on that angle, and also you want to bend the wrist either forward or back. And we'll talk about some principles that I'm going to give you about that as to which way to do it and when and how, or this way, okay? So you basically just want to leave it on an angle. Now, whether you're bending the wrist up this way or this way. Also, hands, you don't want them to get, like you don't want fingers together. You don't want them flat like that. It just says absolutely nothing. And also you don't want them too wide as well. They just have to be completely relaxed. And again, I'm going to show you some more principles. Here's one way of remembering how to pose hands. So what I want you to do, baby, and if you're watching at home, do this with me. I know a few of you have done my workshop, probably watching right now. You know what I'm going to do, and that is this. Let's put your hands flat like this, and then put your hands flat on your biceps, and lower the elbows. There we go. Otherwise, it will look like I Dream of Genie. And then just blink it. So hands like this, hands on your biceps. Now roll the wrists around. Mirror what I'm doing back at home if you're watching right now. So you see how they go like this and they do this. Now you might say, well, Jerry, that's okay for that pose, but that doesn't teach me how to pose hands. Well, it actually does. Let me explain. Come over here for me. Are we still in frame, Joe?
Yeah.
So you see how this hand has done this. I can grab this hand and hold the groom's face. That is the correct way to have a bride hold the groom's face. It's not flat, there's a bit of we're caressing. Do we do this where the fingers are between here? No, we want the forefingers behind. Think of it like God made a bit of a gap between the actual thumb and the fingers so that we have a place to place the hand here as well. Okay, also, when you have a bride's hand hold a groom, you see how that's just straight and flat? That says nothing. If you want to say I love you with the hand, because our faces are kissing and they're in love and all giggly, but if her hand's on her side holding her flowers and my hand's in my pocket, that says absolutely friggin' nothing. So you do this and guide it down. That says I love you. There's more tenderness there. There's more nurturing there. That says nothing. That says I love you. So that's the way, for example, if she was to point her toe, bend her knee, shift her weight back, if she was holding my forearm, that's what she'd be doing. If she was holding my bicep, she'd be doing this. Now, if my hand's on the chest, you can never have the fingers together completely with no gap between them. That's weird. So now, just let the hand breathe a little bit, and basically you go from straight and then just relax. Think of it like a little bit of air can go between the fingers and underneath here. Traditionally, the Jerry Gianos of 30 years ago said do this, up to a point. No one does that naturally. Then you might say, well, no one just poses hands naturally like that either. What we're trying to do is make hands appear natural, but also flattering and communicate something at the same time. So putting the hand on like this is just silly. Putting it like that is silly, but just relaxing it, that could and often does happen. And if you're guiding a hand on a face, there's a tenderness there, and so on and so on. Okay, so you might say, well, how else does that teach me how to pose hands? Well, watch this. Let's say this was the actual stem of some flowers. So do your hands like that again. All right, so keep that hand exactly the way it is, and then bring it over here, and that's exactly how you hold the flowers. So get a bride to hold the flowers. Whoop! That's how you get the bride to hold flowers. Make sense? Let's do that again. Let's say this was a champagne glass. That's exactly how you basically pose a bride's hand. So that's what I'm getting at, guys, is whenever you forget how to pose hands, and that's how you pose a bride's hand on her face, and so on and so on. Now, everyone watching at home, and Melissa with me, I want you to do this. This is how you pose a hand. So I want everyone to extend their hand out like this. And do you see how now, without you even knowing, if you're mirroring me right now, your arm and your forearm basically are holding the weight of your hand. But what you're doing is you're actually extending your hand, you're actually exerting your hand to go flat. Now, what I want us to do is completely relax the hand. So now our arm and our forearm are holding the weight of the hand. See how floppy it is? Do you see what's happening with the hand? So what is actually happening? In fact, what we'll do, baby, you go back, I'll talk more about this, and then you can look at some questions and then we'll talk a bit more about it. So, me doing my hand like this, is this camera catching me here, Joe?
No, you're off camera. You can rest.
Sorry, here?
And then down. Yep.
So, right now, I'm actually leaving my hand limp. I'm not exerting it at all. But do you see how my hand goes up to a point and gradually goes down, and this little pinky goes up a little bit, just a little bit. There's air between my fingers. That's really, really important to understand, because if I was actually, and do you see now, By me actually just doing this, by me bending this up, the palm of my hand up, do you see how this is going up? This little pinky is up, that little index finger is up forward. That just happens naturally. I'm not even doing anything to do that. I'm not thinking about it. That is a natural way the hand will move. That's really, really important to understand. Now, if you've actually ever gone to the ballet, you'll actually look at this. What they do is this pinky will go up, the index finger will go up, the pinky will go up without being a tea party. It'll just be up a little bit, and it's just very, very gentle. Air between everything, and that's the way it works. So when you forget how to pose hands, what I want you to do, guys, is do this, and then you start to understand where to put those hands. Let's show you some more principles, and then let's get into a little bit deeper. So fingers should never be touching straight, curled, or in a fist. So when I say, what do I mean when I say that? Fingers should never be touching. They should never be just, let me just take off my ring there. They should never be like this, okay? It looks weird. I'm exerting myself to do that. If I just relax it, it's soft. They should never be straight, like pointed out really, really straight. They never should be curled like you're holding a tennis ball. And you should never be in a fist, unless you're trying to say something with that fist. Obviously, if you're doing like an editorial type picture, if you're doing like a corporate CEO, a female CEO, that you want to say something, that's when we break the rules. I'm talking more about weddings, but certainly these principles apply with almost everything that we're talking about. So if you look at these hands, for example, you see how delicate they are, that are applying the principles of exactly what I'm basically saying. If her left index finger was all the way out, it would look weird in the context of her holding the back of her dress. Therefore, there is a little bit of curling there with her left hand, but it actually makes sense for what she's doing. And you see how that left index, so her right hand, her right index finger is up, and then you've got the separation of fingers. So the wrist should always be bent and at least slightly. In other words, if you look at your hand like this, for example, okay, so there's your arm and there's your wrist, you never want that straight line. At the absolute minimum, you just want that little bit of a bend here or a little bit of a bend there. And now you might say, when would you exercise those differences? And I'll give you some understanding very, very shortly. I'm giving you the principles first, and then I'm going to prove them with many, many examples. In fact, this is a great example of bending the wrist. If you look at the figure on the left-hand side, you see how it's slightly bent downwards. Then she's actually grabbing her own hair, so to speak. Of course, it's a composite. Look how beautifully delicate those hands are, how delicate those hands are, how it's bent up this way, it's slightly bent this way, and there's beautiful, beautiful hands there as well. So you see that if those hands were not posed correctly, how awkward this shot would be, and how important it is that we pay attention to all those little intricacies, because it's all in the details.
Just to reiterate what you were saying, how you want the fingers to look a little bit natural. You don't want them to be too close together, and you don't want them to be too far apart, like spider hands. We were having comments about spider hands in the thing. So you want them to be somewhere in the middle, somewhere a little bit more relaxed and more natural.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that when you talk about posing hands, posing hands naturally is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction. But let's think about it. Like I said, just follow along with me here. I'm not posing my hand at all, but I'm already doing what I want to how I want to pose hands. It's just very delicate. You naturally never put your hand together like this unless you're slapping someone. You never do this unless you're catching a ball. Just in everyday life, your hands will be usually always have air between the fingers. They'll never be straight. They'll always be up into a turn into the index finger. And it's almost effortless. So what I find is that when photographers don't get it right is because they're trying to overpose the hands, and it starts to look unnatural. And here's another common denominator here. Correctly posed fingers should rarely point to the same place. Now, what does that mean? See how my hand over here, for example, these fingers they're literally pointing to a different place. That's going to hit that way, that'll hit this way, this is further down. They very rarely will dissect either. So if I draw an imaginary line, between my fingers, if pigeon toe was possible with pigeon fingers, it would never cross the same particular line. Because as I was diagnosing posing hands the last couple of days preparing for this very seminar, I was looking at it, I'm like, wait a second, yeah, look, maybe these ones, if you draw an imaginary line, maybe these two would cross, but the other ones wouldn't. So I'm trying to give you principles that you don't have to remember every single one of these, because almost like each of these independently will help you understand how to pose hands. And if you remember 2 of these, 3 of these, 4 of these, like, oh my God, how do I pose that girl's hands? Oh yeah, wait a second, how do I do that, and so on. So if you look at this, for example, you sort of see how it comes up to a point, there's breathing space between them, and the fingers are not pointing to the same place. Yes, her hand's close to her body, but if you brought the hand out, for example, it is pointing to different parts. And that's what it's all about. Arms should never touch the body unless the subject's arms are thin or not visible. So in this case, I think she gets away with it, but she still might not even like that of herself, because the pose itself was, it's sort of like it's almost vulnerable. So she's bringing her hands into her body. Obviously she's covering up her chest. So there's a vulnerability. And what did I say? Good posing, good lighting is either flattering or it helps communicate the message that we're trying to convey. Now she's thin, so she gets away with it. So it's already flattering. She might say it does look a little bit flat, but what I'm doing is I'm using the arm against the body as a form of communication of vulnerability, the fact that she's half naked, and it's supposed to be a soft, vulnerable, but sexy sort of kind of look and feel. So you have to actually understand when it's the right time to break those rules. My encouragement to you is don't be freaking lazy and say, well, Jerry said this is all about communication, therefore I just won't pose any hands, let them do what they want. Then you look at your photographs overall and you think, oh, there's something missing. There's a bit of soul missing. There's a bit of energy missing. There's romance missing. There's a feeling missing. It's because you didn't actually pay attention to the hands at all. Just know that pay attention to this stuff. Go out of your way to communicate with those hands. And if your gut says something's not right, it probably isn't. Okay, avoid posing a subject's hands closer to the camera than their face. This is a great example, but I did soften it in certain ways. Let me explain. Her hand, her right hand, is slightly closer to the camera than her face. It is a bit in shadow, and we have the brightest part of the image, which is the whites of her eyes and her beautiful contrast of the eyes, and the hands are posed quite beautifully, but I was bordering on actually making the hands quite prominent. Now, that being said, if you remember seeing this video on JGBT, this was a jewelry shoot. So this was actually all about the jewelry. So I sort of broke my own rule here, but it wasn't really that much of a problem regardless. And if it was, it's okay because it actually is about the jewelry more than her, so to speak. So again, I'm trying to give you those subtleties to really understand, because I believe the difference between a good photographer and a great photographer are these subtleties that not many people pay attention to. And I'm telling you, this is a way that you can separate yourself from the competition, because if you add hands, eyes, face, body, contrast, composition, cropping, all the things that we teach on JGBT, you multiply that by 4 or 5 things that could have been done differently on 1,000 images at a wedding. Tell me you don't stand out better than the next person. You will. Okay, here's another one. Avoid posing both arms and hands in the exact same position. Evens often look odd. Now, what the hell does that mean? All right, so have you ever actually photographed, say, 2 people, and you've got a vertical frame, horizontal frame, and there's 2 people there, it's even. Something looks a bit odd. It's even numbers, but it's odd. The minute you introduce a third person, now there's a hierarchy, there's a triangular composition, there's a feeling, it's more aesthetically pleasing when you have 3s and 5s rather than your 2s and so on. So when it comes to body parts, try to avoid mirroring a body part exactly unless you're trying to communicate something. Let me give you some examples. So in this case, do you see how she's got both hands on her hips, but one hand is slightly above the other? This was shot only a few days ago, out of camera, no retouching. So that right hand is a little bit taller because our eyes read from top left to bottom right. So if I can, I'm going to get this hand higher, this hand a bit lower. So then we have that beautiful, nice flow that's triangular composition. There's a beautiful flow. This again, do you see how I've got one hand on the hip and then one hand actually holding the veil? So in this particular case, there is a nice flow and it actually works. Now this exact shoot, this very, very shoot, I went against that common denominator, that guide or that rule that I just gave you a few moments ago, and that is this. So if you look at this shot, her hands are perfectly mirrored. They're very symmetrical. When you think of symmetry, you think of strength. When you think of something strong, it's bold, it's in your face. What is she saying? She's basically singing, I am woman, hear me roar. She's on a ladder. She's larger than life. She appears strong, beautiful, and just, she owns it. Therefore, those hands communicated exactly what I wanted, and it actually worked. So in that case, again, you've got to use what I just said as a common denominator, but know that when it helps communicate something, great. When it takes away and you think, oh my God, it's just too symmetrical, it's too predictable, why would I do that? Let's change it up, and that's when you should. Any questions, baby?
No,
cool?
we're just soaking it in, baby.
All right, awesome. Okay, there's a couple of things here. People have asked me, well, Jerry, when do I bend the wrist up and when do I bend the wrist down? Okay. Here is what I believe is the right way of doing it. Raise the hand, as in raise the hand. People say bend the wrist. I suppose it's an anomaly because you can't really bend a wrist. The wrist is here. The hand is raising. So Melissa and I were talking last night, well, how do we even communicate this? What's the proper grammatical, linguistically correct way of explaining this? But let's say raise the hand when it's lower than the waist. So in other words, let me come over here. So if a bride is actually standing there and she's holding her veil out, when you raise the hand when it's lower than the waist. So my waist is here. So if she's holding out the veil, the hand would be like this. This, the common denominator is that will not look good as often as this will. So my suggestion is do this. Okay, let me show you some examples. So if you see that, you see how delicate it is. We've got this sort of slight bend of the elbow, and that's important too. You don't want to actually have that straight. Slightly bend the elbow, slightly bend the wrist. And in this case, the hand is lower than the waist, therefore the hand is raised slightly. And you see how delicate and beautiful those hands are. Now look at the difference when she actually brings her hand down or it's pretty straight. Now she's gorgeous, it's a beautiful setting, but it's fairly straight, and if anything it's bent slightly in. Although there's still a beautiful softness and charm about that photograph, I would dare say that photo on the left-hand side looks a lot better. Would you agree? Now again, looking at this shot again, it's underneath the waist, the wrist goes up. It actually just feels and flows a bit better. So when do we actually lower the hand or drop the hand or bend the wrist down? And that is this. We lower the hand when it's higher than the waist. So the minute my hand goes above my waist, that's when this will make more sense. This can sometimes work well, but it depends on what the person is doing. Again, these are no absolutes. I just look back at my work over all the years when I started teaching, and this is just something that I thought, you know what, if I was starting to shoot and I didn't want to go through the growing pains that Jerry did, well, what is the common denominator? And that's basically it, is that when the hand is lower than the waist, it's up. When it's above the waist, it's down. So let me show you some examples of this very common denominator. So this one, so you sort of see how her hands are down, they look really beautiful. And it could be also, you see how the hands are on a banister, but they're still above her waist, so it still makes sense. Could you imagine her doing this? Well, it's not going to hold anything, it'll look a bit weird. Now this one, this actually just happened, I was just having some fun with her. I posed her quite perfectly per se. When I say perfectly, as in I executed my desired result, and that's what I call perfection in photography. So this hand stayed where it was. In the heat of the battle and laughing and pulling her veil off her face, she exposed the thickest and widest part of her wrist, and therefore it's not what I wanted to do, but because the emotion was so great, I still love the photograph. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that if the emotion will beat perfection, if the emotion of the hands mirror what's happening on the face and everything's good, then life is good as well. So this, for example, do you sort of see how what I said is that when the hand is above the waist, it sort of makes sense that we lower the hand, even for a different kind of a pose, even sitting down. So you see how, both hands are really above the waist, down, and it actually looks natural because that's the way it will just naturally fall and flop. And it's funny because you may remember this following picture. Remember this picture? This was from the D850 campaign. She is a trained ballerina. Of course she is. She can freaking balance on a bottle, on 2 bottles of champagne. It's quite ridiculous, but it proves my point. As soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, I'm validated here. This hand is lower than the waist, it's up. That one's higher than the waist, it's down. Could you imagine the same grace if this hand was down and that hand was up? Perhaps it would look nice, and maybe if you didn't see anything different or no comparison, that you might feel that's okay. But I'm telling you now, guys, it makes a difference. Like I said, I can't tell you enough, that after the eyes, the hands are the most expressive thing. You see what I'm saying to you now? I'm begging you to understand what I'm saying. If I just put my hands on my side, it probably wouldn't have the same impact. And ultimately, use this rule. If it looks good, damn it, shoot it. So you can throw every rule that anyone else has ever said or written. You can break all my rules, all the common denominators. But if it looks good, trust your gut. Don't strive for like clinical, emotionless perfection. Because in rawness, in imperfection, there comes beauty. So it's up to you to decipher. If I just said here, and you might say, well, Jerry, why would you be teaching all this stuff if really this is what you're trying to say? Well, if I gave you no common denominators, no guides, no rules, no nothing, then you would just shoot and be lazy and loose, and perhaps your art won't be as effective because you're not communicating effectively with those hands, whether it's romance, whether it's sexy, whether it's delicacy, whether it's tenderness, whether it's the warmth of a mother's hand on the cheek of her son. So we have to understand that it's such an expressive part of the body that we have to use them. All right, there's my foundation, and the foundation was actually already 40 minutes. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to start to share with you all these ideas. Common poses that include arms and hands, okay? So we're going to talk to you about arms being crossed, including variations. So how do you cross a woman's hands, and variations of that, like one arm sort of crossed or behind the body, or so on. What are good examples of that? Hands on hips. Well, how do you do that? What are the guides there that we can look at? Hands on face. Like how do you put a girl's hands on her face? And there are so many ways that you can do that, right? So how do we do that? Hands on head. So apart from the actual face, how do you actually put the hand on her head? Hands on body. So if she's just resting her hand on top of her chest, if she's putting her hand on another part of her body, what do? Free hands. Literally hands doing nothing. They're just floating by her side, or they're resting on a sofa or something. What do you do there? Hands together. If the bride's got her hands together, what do? How does that work? And so on and so forth. So arms crossed, I duplicated that. So there's my mistake for the day. I've got to add a mistake every so often. Actually, is it humanly possible that because what I'm saying now won't be broadcast for another minute, could I sort of somehow suspend the present and miss that?
You need to own that.
I cannot. I'm owning that. I'm so excited about how arms can be crossed. I'm going to share with you twice. Hands on partner. So, for example, if a bride is holding her partner, where does she put her hands? What are the guides and common denominators in effective use of hands in that situation? How do we do that? And also holding things, like on detail. A bride holding her own hair, flowers, jewelry, glass, veil, earrings, a banister of a staircase. All those things and more we'll cover right now. So let's start together now. So how would we actually pose hands together and arms crossed? Because essentially some of these things cross over. So let's show you those things as well. Do you see how in this particular case, obviously got window light coming through and she's just putting her perfume on. She sprays her perfume and you can see how delicate those hands are. The slight bending of both wrists, the separation of the fingers not pointing to the exact same place. And there's a delicacy there. So you sort of see how this hand is pretty much that. And again, I'm not posing or thinking about my hand in any way, shape or form. This one, if I just let my hand go, you see how naturally my fingers sort of come back in? Not too curled, like claw-like, just very delicate. And that's how we do it. Hands crossed over, again, if you're leaning on something, it's just very soft. It's just very delicate. It's just nice and soft there. Let's say when you've got legs crossed and you just want to place them over the legs there, again, they're just draped over. It's effortless. Sometimes we overdo it where it looks forced, where if the bride or model or whoever you're photographing is exerting energy to actually pose those hands, arguably it's probably posing correctly. This one, if you look at the hands crossed, does that remind you of the exact pose that we did at the start of the presentation today with Melissa? Of course it does. So exactly, it wouldn't be like this. Okay, so it wouldn't be like this. It roll the wrists around, that's how we do it there as well. This one, the hands are a little bit stronger. They're still delicate, but they're a little bit stronger. What am I trying to say? She's a queen. Therefore, a queen would be poised, she would show poise, and she would show strength. This one, it's almost like a moment between a moment. You can see how we've got a big gap between the arms there and a smaller gap there. What did we say? Try never to have the hands completely symmetrical and they're the exact same thing. Otherwise, that'd be predictable and boring and too structured, unless you're trying to say something like I did in terms of exuding strength and so on. This is quite delicate, and she captures the spirit of Marilyn Monroe and so on. And this shoot we haven't shared yet, but parts of the shoot of Nicole Melrose, a beautiful model that I've worked with, we'll be sharing on future episodes of JGBT. This one, obviously I'm strategically hiding the naughty bits, with her hair and her knee and her arm. And there was times where we exposed her body and all that stuff. And gorgeous girl, beautiful inside and out, all that kind of stuff. In this case, the hands, even though that we're actually showing the flat part of the hand and not the thinnest part, it actually just wasn't quite natural. I said to her, I posed them perfectly and it didn't feel right. So I said to her, look, just bring your hands back and just cross them over, however it makes you feel, just cross them over just gently. Gave her a loose direction. I looked at it, overall, it feels just soft and beautiful, and it just worked. So I was happy to not make it perfect per se. In this case, obviously I've got the Hollywood light there as before per se, but in this case she's standing, it's very strong, she's quite confronting. But you can see how she's just draping her elbow back and the hands are just very delicate and they're engaged without being forceful and a bit too stiff, like we're saying. You see how we're taking that strength a little even further. You see how, although at first sight the hands look like they're mirrored exactly, this one's bent a little bit further, smaller breathing space here than over there, and the hands are quite delicate. As you can see, they're very, very soft. And they always almost do the exact same thing. Effortless, relaxing of hands. Another great way to remember posing hands, guys, is this. Now, if you've actually seen me at a workshop, you'll probably remember me doing this kind of demonstration, but it actually really, really helps. Helps you remember it. Think of blowing up a balloon and blowing up too far. You need to let a little bit of air out. So watch this. That's what you want to do, guys. Let the air out of the pose. If it looks stiff, if it looks like you blew up a balloon and it's all wide and stiff, then you've gone too far. Just let the air out of the pose. The shoulders could be stiff. Everything could be stiff. Just relax everything. And I'm telling you, it will look better. In this case, typically I wouldn't normally have the arms like that and straight. I was playing around with some ideas in posing. And I don't know, she just had this way about her. She was very long-limbed, there was sort of like this vulnerability but confidence coming out, and that pose seemed to give me that look and feel, that confidence with that vulnerability, and I let it go. And that's what I'm trying to say, guys, is this is an important thing I'm about to tell you. If we start talking about posing and rules and guides all day long, the next time you shoot, you might just go for clinical perfection and totally lose the emotion, which means that you'll be worse than when you started. So don't go into a shoot thinking, you know what, if this was going to be entered into competition, it would get a 74. Guys, you have to remember that your clients are number one. Your clients are what pays the bills, awards, trophies, all that kind of stuff, and getting a good score in competition, because hands have to be posed a certain way. It's not all about that, guys. Yes, if you can get posing hands and emotion out of them and have it beautiful and conducive of getting compliments from someone like me and judges, fantastic. But remember that it's really about the emotion. It's really about being meaningful with those hands and expressing something. So whether, and that's just a general comment, a blanket comment, whether we talk about lighting, whether it talks about composition, if you feel a certain way and it's more meaningful to shoot a certain way, and it's not lazy, but it's intentional and deliberate to communicate a message, screw the judges, screw what Jerry thinks, and make sure that is all about the feeling, and it's all about the emotion that image actually evokes. I'm a little bit greedy where I go to the nth degree where I want emotion and perfection. And often you'll hear me say perfection, and let me remind you, because I mentioned it earlier today, perfection in my mind is this. It's communicating my desired result, executing my desired result. In other words, I wanted to do this. This is what I wanted. It was very deliberate, and I executed. For me, that's perfect, a perfect effort. Perfection in art is a fallacy. It's not real. There's no such thing as perfection. That's like saying, who's the perfect singer? Who's the perfect song? What's the perfect movie? It's all subjective. So communicate effectively and you'll be totally fine. This one, believe it or not, this is the same girl. With a change of outfit, with a change of lighting, with the softness of those hands, just playing with those chains, you see how different this girl looks and feels. And again, I'm communicating very different things with this, to this, to this, to this. Even with her eyes, like, giving a half squint with the eyes, add a bit of mystique. The lighting being fairly flat goes with her skin tone, goes with what she's wearing. And then that tentative nature, that moment between a moment that we've captured, actually makes sense with those hands. This girl, I was photographing her, and it was more like, she looked like a performer. She looked like Jennifer Lopez. Like, there's glimpses of her that look like Jennifer Lopez. And I actually said to her, I just want you to arch your back, pretend like you're clapping to like a salsa beat or something like that. And it's amazing that when she did it, she outstretched her fingers. And then I said, just relax your hands. Let them fit into each other like a glove and like a puzzle. And then we got those beautiful fingers. So although that left hand is quite straight and flat, it's that right hand that's breaking the monotony of that left hand. And that's what I'm getting at, is that how much more emotion am I getting? You can almost hear the music with this particular photograph. Let's have a look at this one. You see how that shoulder comes up. Obviously the hair adds to the emotion, but imagine if those hands were just dead and flat and straight. It just wouldn't look nowhere near as basically good as this is going on as well. So that delicate hand there, that bringing up of that particular dress, the wind, again, this is making me feel like it's a moment between a moment, and we just caught her. She's almost surprised, but she loves the fact that you're looking. It's sort of almost like an acknowledgement of a voyeur type of feel. How about this one? Those hands, although delicate, you can see they're actually quite poised and strong. Well, she's a queen. This was like a Game of Thrones type of look and feel. So for me, I wanted her to be strong. I wanted her to feel that way, and it just worked. It just worked. This one, you remember I've showed a previous shot of this girl as well. She's crossing her arms over. Her arm is looking a little bit flatter. She gets away with it because she's skinny, but those hands are actually, and those wrists are photographed on the thinnest part of her wrist. It's quite delicate. So you see how this isn't as vulnerable. Yes, she's covering up the naughty bits, so to speak, but she's actually got her chin up now, looking off to the light. She's being modest, but she's got confidence as well, so it actually works. This one, same girl, just different lighting situation here. Window light still, but just me from a different angle. But you see exactly those arms that we did before with Melissa. That's exactly how I posed those hands. Then what I did is I brought those shoulders forward, and then I brought her chin out. We call it the turtleneck. So just bring that chin out and then sink the chin in. I quite like that look when you bring the shoulders in and then you sink, and there's this beautiful energy and movement with the body, but she's actually quite stationary and serene. It's quite beautiful.
Is it okay that the curled fingers at the bottom of the hand make it look like it's a little bit cut off?
Is it this one?
Yes.
Yeah, so this one, she's grabbing her dress. So for me, it's totally fine. There's a, she's grabbing her dress, she's pulling it forward. If she was doing that in real life, this is what would happen. Now, could that pinky be extended a little bit? It could, but I think if you were grabbing it, it's almost like saying, I'm going to show you my body, I'm going to expose my legs. There is this, again, that voyeuristic feel that I was referring to before. It feels to me like she's covering up, but it almost feels like this hand could be showing off her shoulder next, this hand could be exposing her legs, and all of a sudden I'll give you what you want to have a look at. I mean, you make a story in your mind and have some fun with it, but I have no problem with that. For me, if it's fine, if it communicates what I want, I'm totally cool with it. It's never laziness, it's very, very deliberate. And if it's not deliberate and it happens organically with the model doing what they're doing, and it feels right, I'm going to let it go and be happy with it. Yes, baby.
And then if you go back to where we were, with the bridal boudoir photo.
This one?
Yes, that one and the one that we showed before of her. Did you pick that photo because she's topless? Would you do that pose even if she did have a top on? Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, if she was wearing something that you ruined the detail or you squished detail, it'd be a problem. But no, that'd be fine. I think it'd be beautiful. I think that if she was wearing something sheer, obviously it suits it because if a bride wants some boudoir shots without showing too much information, but she wants to be quite strong and powerful and so on, not to show too much, this is perfect for it. And this one as well. You can't even see her bust at all, but that with her backless part of it, and if that was actually, if that was mirrored like that on an album, for example, then that's modest, but it's clean and it's beautiful at the same time. So yeah. All is good. All right, let me show you some more things here. Let's talk now about hands on hips. How do you do it? What's the rules about hands on hips? And by the way, guys, everything that I'm sharing with you today, no one has taught me. This is just what I believe after 25 years of photographing, that after 25 years of shooting, this is what I believe will work most of the time and for these reasons. Hands on hips. Let's talk about this. Actually, baby, can you come here for a second? Might not be, you're wearing pants, so it might not be perfectly for what I want, but I think we'll understand. My advice is this. Now what's beautiful about a woman? Curves. This is what we love. Love the bust, love the waist, love the hips, fantastic. So the thinnest part of her is this. So if a hand covers up the thinnest part of her waist, so cover up the thinnest part of your waist, right? So that is not right as far as I'm concerned, because you're missing that beautiful valley. Think of it like peaks and valleys, mountain range and valley and so on. So what you want to do is that this part here, that whether you've got both hands on hips or whether you've just got one hand, you want to find the thinnest part of the waist, okay, which is about there, and you want this little webby, that little webby bit, this piece is to just bring your attention to the thinnest part of her waist. Bang, that's where you want it, as opposed to something like a little bit higher. You see how we see that beautiful curve here a lot better than this one. Now, you can go down, but I think it depends. You could go down if maybe the actual hips of the girl are a little bit wider and you want to soften the hips. So you expose the thinnest part of the actual hips and then you actually cover up the thickest part of her hips. That's fine. So again, use your gut, but just the golden rule is just don't cover up the thinnest part of her waist. Let that line of the hand just guide you up to it, and life is good. Thank you, baby. So if you look at this girl, for example, you see how those hands are just delicate and effortless. You see how that here runs your eye right into the thinnest part of her waist. Beautiful. Now, this girl, I've gone her a little bit lower because she had these really long legs and it just looked a bit weird. When she had her hands up, the thinnest part of her waist was here and it looked a little bit weird. So depending on the body type, you can't really follow these guidelines perfectly because it just won't work with every single person. Like Joe, for example, you're 6'2" like me? We're the same height. So we're both 6'2". Joe has a shorter body and longer legs. Like his legs go on friggin' forever. So he's going to look a little bit different. He might look taller than me just purely by just the way his body looks. So it's all perception. It depends on the way we look. This girl, for example, you may have seen this only recently on JGBT. This was all done with ice lights. And I turned her body, so this wasn't completely on the side of her hips there, but when I turned her, she's not covering it completely, but it actually works. And those hands are quite delicate and they're quite poised, but they're more Hollywoody, they're more staged. It wasn't meant to look natural per se. This one, what am I trying to say with those hands? She's obviously got attitude. Look at her face, her chin is up, she means business. But have a look at this. For the actual threat of not being perfectly mirrored, this hand is a little bit higher, this hand's a bit lower. Which hip looks thinner, would you say? Baby, what do you think? So look at those two hands. Which looks more curvaceous, would you say?
So the one, her left hand,
yeah,
shows the curve more.
Yep, so that shows the curve more. That one, she's gone a little bit higher. So remember earlier today I said, try never to have anything mirrored unless you want to show strength or a different particular perspective or a different emotion. So in this case, I brought one hand up, one hand lower, so I broke that, but then, not broke that, I didn't break that rule, I went with that rule, but then I've broken the hip rule, the guideline or the common denominator they've given you because I've covered the thickest part. But because I see at least one, and she's thin already and got beautiful curves, I'm totally okay with it. Let's go to this one. You see how now we've got her shoulder up, which I think is, in this case, very beautiful because we've got the shadow there and it cuts right in. The hand on her hip brings your attention to the thinnest part of her waist. Typically is right up here, just the nature of her pose. Because she's lifting up her shoulder, like it's almost like that arch and that rib cage is going up a little bit higher. But here, I still get that curve. And her body type was totally fine too. Going back to this particular photograph, she needed more curve. You can sort of see how she's quite thin, and the hand almost acts like a curve if you look at it closely. Then some people say, Jerry, when do you actually do, let me show you. So Jerry, when do you do, say, like some people just do this. It looks weird. It's non-committal, it's non-engaging. That looks weird. Bend the wrist down. So there's one way of doing it. Or you might even do this. This is a rarity for me if it actually works. It communicates a different feeling. Let me explain to you. Look at this girl now. Do you see how it almost has a different sense of attitude? Now we can't see all her fingers, so typically I don't like this pose because you only normally see a thumb, but somehow it suited the fact that she was very confident, she's peering off to her left. There's almost like this sort of bitchy sort of look and feel to her, this confident sort of almost menacing look, but it actually just works. And that's what I'm trying to get at, guys, is that posing is a form of communication. You must say something with your posing. Baby girl.
Speaking about saying something, how exactly do you communicate what you want to do when you're posing hands? Because sometimes just saying, relax your hands, doesn't always work. So what is some of the language that you sometimes will use, or how do you get that pose just right with the hands?
See, when it comes to posing, I believe hands, arms and shoulders of, let's say, of a guy to a girl and a girl to girl is a safe place to touch. So if you've developed trust, someone's booked you it's almost like I don't really have to ask permission to basically hold her shoulders, arms and hands. Any other part of the body, you would say is a bit of a no-go zone, unless you develop trust, unless there's a friendship there, unless something, but usually you want to ask permission. With hands, I normally touch and I normally guide. So let me show you Melissa. So you stay there, baby girl. We'll cut to you. So if I wanted to pose Melissa's hands on her own, ooh, zapped you, totally zapped you. So I can just grab Melissa's hands like this, right? Nice and delicate, and then I can just guide them on her face. And then I can get her to rest on her elbow. And then I might just say, just relax your fingers a little bit. So I often, you basically know, guys, that when I pose people, I get them to mirror me. So if I basically come right over here and just, let's just do this hand. So we're mirroring. So just outstretch. And see, I might extend the fingers so it's obviously and overtly wrong so she can see. Just copy me. And then now it becomes more amplified with how relaxed I want the hands to be. And then I might just drop. No. But you can sort of see how that hands just have to be softened, have to be guided. And if I, for example, I wanted the bride's hand on the groom's face, then again, what I would do, you sort of see how easily with my bird finger and my thumb, I literally can move that hand anywhere I want. So what I do is I grab the hand on the face and I guide, and it's almost sometimes what I do is I stroke the wrist. Basically, I'm saying, I just want you to relax. Just relax the hand without saying a single word. So hands, I normally touch and place and guide almost all the time, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Okay, let me just keep on showing you some more stuff here. You sort of see how we've got both hands on hips, and then she needs shape here because she's very, very thin, she's very, very young, and then we've actually got that hand going right in. This is giving her a little bit more curve as well. So this is actually going to work for her. And you see also the fact that I've turned her body towards me, for example, and that makes her look almost like she's got more of a hip, more shape. Easy, beautiful. And again, you see how it's actually going to the thinnest part of her waist. This is guiding you in. This should be the thinnest part. And again, some body types, it might look really awkward because you're going up really, really high. That's not going to work, so be careful with that. And again, right over here, this is actually the thinnest part of her waist. So sometimes it just needs to lead right in. And if ever you're actually feeling a little bit weird about it, not knowing where to put them, just ask the girl to put her hands on her hips on her own, and then get her to mirror you and bring the hands down. And then you might look at it and go, slide the hand up, down. Okay, love that, perfect. Trust your gut. It's just going to look better at one particular point, depending on the body type of the person that you're actually photographing. So guys, I just want to let you know that there is so much more content. I can't even tell you. And for those of you who've seen me actually teach posing and posing hands before, you know this is all new content, and I've sort of diagnosed it and systemized it in a little bit different way. A very, very powerful portrait that I photographed of a family recently where I can't even tell you that the difference between the direction that I gave in the beginning of this particular session and then a few words that I said and how much the hands not only were powerful, but they were so emotional, and really highlights the importance of the fact that you can never forget hands when you're posing or when you're photographing any kind of human being, because they are so much more powerful than you actually realize. We set the foundation. We talked about a lot of principles behind posing hands, female hands specifically, and just make sure you go back, and if you have time today, watch it today so it all actually makes sense, because I don't want to cover things sort of again. I mean, there'll be a lot of repetition with what I'm actually doing, but I'm very specific to a part of the body and all those different things. We covered the foundations of posing hands. We talked about how to pose female hands together, so putting them together, arms crossed, different ways we can do that and combinations of those things, and also hands on hips. And there's many different principles behind those as well. Today, when I say most likely, because of questions and Q&A and all those kinds of things, sometimes we'll do more than what we anticipate, sometimes we'll do less. Almost certainly the posing female hands will go over not only today and also next week as well. So I'm almost certain it'll be 3 parts, possibly even 4, we don't know. But I'm pretty certain it'll be that. So at the moment, we are going to talk about hands on face and head. It was funny because if I said we're just going to be talking about hands on head, then it's going to be like when you're a child, right? So face is part of your head, of course, but I'm going to talk about how to actually put your hands on your head as well. And that'll give us a really good idea of how to do things too. Now I'm going to walk you through quite a few photographs of these particular genres within the overall genre that we're talking about to give you some confidence to go ahead. So now we're talking about hands on face and head. Now, this particular photograph, you might recognize this particular girl as the cover shot on our homepage of JGPT. In this case, she's somewhat boudoir, so in a sense there's a little bit of implied stuff, but I got the actual dress and brought it up. And why do I mention boudoir? Because it's sort of like she's almost praying or in a solemn moment, so it's almost like a sexy prayer. Can we call it that? I have no idea. But it somehow worked. Do you notice how we've already mentioned last week how the fingers are slightly parted, so there's a gap between the fingers. It's very, very soft. Hands should be organic, they should be natural, they should just be easy and free flowing. And certainly this is a good idea. Now, can you imagine if we're looking at a profile shot, so on the big camera here, if I put my fingers together and did this, it just wouldn't have that appeal that we're looking for. So think about it, put the hands together and just don't think about it too much. Get the model to relax her fingers like this, and then just give me a bit of breathing space, a bit of air between the fingers, and you'll find that will actually work. Now this photograph, if you see how she's actually doing up her hair at the back there a little bit, this is somewhat of an editorial photograph, as you can see. While we're here, I want to talk to you about the complexity of this photograph above and beyond hands, because it's actually quite deep. Now, although it looks like a simple photograph, now generally center composition you would say is pretty predictable, and some would say almost boring. In this case though, the bride makes it asymmetrical. So if you look at the gap between his arms, it gives him a silhouette. If you look at the gap beyond his arm and her body, it mirrors her beautiful curve and her beautiful shape. Certainly we have the sun coming from the side, and we've got beautiful detail on her back and that little shadow in the small of the back on the spine. And then she's just doing basically the back of her hair. And then of course her arm leads you right into the groom. And of course his nose does not cross the bridge of the cheek. Wouldn't you say there is so much that goes into a somewhat simple photograph? But you look at it, it actually is quite complex when it comes to posing of it and all those different things as well. So just so you know, this actual wedding was actually photographed in Greece, in a beautiful island.
The image that you're showing right now, that was actually taken in a day after session, but a lot of people will ask about, when you're shooting in a bright sun situation where you don't have access to anything that's shady, what do you do? And that this whole shoot was done at noon on the beach with no covering at all. So it'll be really, really cool to see.
Also, I want to just mention something to you. We don't really want to see the palm or the other side of the hand there as well. The way she's actually doing her hair there a little bit, I'm sort of sacrificing the perfection per se for the sake of it actually being real. In other words, if I was to turn around here and do this or delicately, it just wouldn't make sense. So that's when it just has to look real. Posing, for it to look effortless, it has to look organic and as if a bride or a girl happened to be doing that at that particular time. So just remember that as well. All right, let's go on to the next. Oh, by the way, do you see where the actual horizon is as well? I've often said the horizon, or any strong horizontal line or crop, really has to be below the chest and above the elbow. So if you can squat down, go a little bit taller, depending on where you are at when you're photographing, try to do that as well. Do you notice how she's also pushed her booty to the right, which basically means that we're creating shape as well. So every so often, I'll talk about hands, but if there's complexities to the so-called simplicity, I'll also want to share that with you too. Okay, so this girl here, now we're lying down on the ground and you basically see how we're creating that gorgeous S-curve with her arms. And not only that, it's repeating quite dramatically. You'll see that triangles are very, very pleasing to the eye. They're very aesthetic, they're very, very beautiful. So make sure that you know that the more triangles that we have, the more curves we have, the more everything will be amplified. So in this case, beautiful catch lights in the eyes there as well. You sort of see how we've got the beautiful softness of the wrist and that beautiful softness of the wrist. The hands don't look forced, got gorgeous catch lights on the eyes, and life is good. Same girl, this time, such a different look, right? If you look back at this photograph, all her hair is out. She's like a tiger, like a mane, beautiful hair out, and then we tighten up the hair there as well. And you can sort of see how very delicate we're actually holding those hands, rather than it be forced. If you're going to do that and rest the chin right on the palm there, you just want to relax those fingers a little bit rather than have them like this, or just have them delicate like that. And then it's quite passive, it's very gentle. Hands are a form of communication. They're not just the pose. After the eyes, the hands are the most expressive thing in my humble opinion. So if you're not using hands to actually pose, you're losing a valuable source of communication. In this case, the lighting, you see how the lighting here is a bit harder. Now we have soft hands, but it's quite strong and dynamic. You've got beautiful curves, but you've got this strength, and she's framing her face with her hands. In this one, it's quite soft. There is a little bit of a gap between her arm and her body, and even if it pressed up against the body, you would find that she's quite slim and she gets away with it. But that delicate hands are important. You see how she's turning her face up to the light, and we've got some gorgeous catch lights there as well. Let's have a look at this pose. So don't forget, we're talking about hands on face and on head. Certainly we've got a combination here. This hand is strategically placed so that we cover up the naughty bits. In this case, do you see how beautiful and delicate those hands are? Here we're actually selling jewelry and we're selling luxury. So that's why you can imagine we've got the fur coat. We're not really embellishing with different clothes and colors. We've got the coat for luxury. There's a sliver of body making it very sensual and luxurious. And we're selling jewelry to beautiful housewives who stay at home and are just with absolute luxury. That's the sensibility of this shoot. In this case, the hand, you can sort of see how delicate that hand is, and how you pose a hand to a face, you actually don't even pose it. Let your arm and your wrist actually hold the weight of your hand, and then all of a sudden, it'll just work. And then as you tilt upwards, so you tilt up, you see how those fingers automatically go up like that. And then what's happening is that little index finger is just causing a little bit of a support for the face. Not that she's needing it to support the weight of her face, but that's how it works. There's a couple of variations to that as well. You can sort of see how that goes very delicate, beautiful curve up there as well. And then you see that sort of come down. So very slight little differences, and that works. Some people ask, well, Jerry, is it okay for an arm to go in and out of a frame? In this case, it's only coming in. We don't really see where it comes out. I would say you want to try to avoid that, but if you're cropping up close, you are going to get that. Like you're going to get maybe a close-up of face and the hands coming in. That is no problem whatsoever. I find that when it becomes an issue is when this part of the arm goes out of the frame and then we come in, that may be an issue. And I'm saying is try to avoid that, but it's not an absolute. And Kathy and all our new members, when I talk about these things, there is no absolutes. They're common denominators. Yes, some people call those rules, but if I say it rule, it means they can't really be broken. If we call them common denominators, it means that this will work most of the time with this kind of a girl, with this kind of a face and that kind of light, and so on and so forth. So just be wary of that. Okay, so same girl, and this is a great shoot to show jewelry off. Do you see how we've got that beautiful delicate hand over here like this, and then this one is just very gently sort of coming over the top. And again, do you see how the hand is just flowing? If someone thinks about it too much, it will destroy the picture. It's overposed. Hands need to just be soft and delicate and effortless, as we have it here. Think of like the arm and the wrist is doing all the work. The hand is just relaxing. The wrist is just relaxing. Okay, this one as well. Again, I'm showing off excuses to show off rings here, right? So in this case, I've chopped half the face. I love that beautiful shadow on her eyelashes, the shadows on her face. But then we've got the beautiful, delicate nature of that hand sort of going up. Do you think this would have the same appeal if the bride just did this? It's like she's pulling herself away or something like that. So we've got to be really, really careful. And again, you never want to see straight fingers. The only time that I feel like you want straight fingers, well, at least slightly straight, is when you put a bride's hand on the chest of the groom and then just relax. They're somewhat straight, but there's a little bit of a curve, as you can see. So just make sure that that's one of the only times where I'm okay with having it like that. Baby girl.
Just on that subject, because you have that image up, when you're shooting a wedding or even an engagement session, you know, sometimes the bride would like a shot of her engagement ring showing off the diamond, but then you're also showing the back of the hand. But if you go to the side, you're not really getting a clear shot of the ring. Is there a solution to that, or do you just try to balance that out somehow?
Well, I guess, I mean, unless I misunderstood the question, if she was wearing an engagement ring right now, would that not show that engagement ring perfectly in this particular case? Is that what?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes, it would, yep.
yeah. So
you can still turn it and then just have it still showing
absolutely.
everything.
So in this case, like if she's doing this or on something, then the engagement ring's there. It may be perfectly, if it's perfectly in the middle of her finger, it may actually be incorrect when it comes to the angle that you're photographing. So don't be afraid to just pose the hand and then just move the actual ring, rotate it a little bit so that it's actually visible from your perspective. No one's going to say, well, that's been rotated, it looks a bit silly. So just, in this case, they're very big, so it's almost like one way to wear it. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yes,
All right,
thank you.
wonderful. Same thing here as well. So if you've got rings, then that's a great way of actually photographing an engagement ring, for example. If you just put it down onto the actual wedding ring finger, that'd be great. And if you've heard me teach before and about detail shots, I will always reference detail shots with a heartbeat, which basically means that we want a suggestion of the human form. Now, yes, often these blogs and all that stuff, anything you see online, Pinterest, where we promote selling the jewelry, so to speak, and all the detail shots, not in the environment that they're used. In other words, we have a ring and it's just sitting on a table. I believe it's a lot nicer when you see it on the person's hand. It's a lot more emotive, a lot more beautiful, a lot sexier, and so on. So I encourage you that when you're doing ring shots, that do it in a way where you see a suggestion of the girl. So you could crop that really tight, for example. Imagine actually cropping that sort of just there. Can you imagine like that shot as a vertical and cropping it just there? Wouldn't that be a gorgeous ring shot? All right, let's keep moving on. In this case, you sort of see how there's a very delicate little join there, the way she's just going up to a point and then she's framing her face. Now, one might argue that right arm is actually looking a little bit flat to the camera. I find that when I'm doing these kinds of shots, if it feels right, when it goes against that particular rule that we may be suggesting, then just go with it. Go with your gut. Don't do it out of laziness or ignorance. Well, ignorance, it's a bad word for saying, well, I don't know any better, if that makes any sense. I'm suggesting that my common denominator is that hand and that wrist could be a little bit more delicate by being twisted. But think about it this way. I might actually go around over here, Joe, so in front of that TV screen. So if you look at this hand, at the moment, right, she's putting that leg up and she's sort of doing this. I could turn it and it might look a little bit forced. It almost looks like there's a bit of stress on the arm. So that's when I'm saying, all right, I get that delicate nature by the finger being pointed, and you can almost feel the bend in the wrist, even though it's towards the camera, but just trust your gut. If this looks a little bit weird, which is what your inclination would be, then I'm saying just relax it and then do the best you can and go with your gut. For me, that felt right under the circumstances, and that's why I was happy to accept it. Also, guys, don't be so concerned. Now, of course, we're focusing on hand posing, all right? We're focusing on hand posing, which means that, you know, you might go to see a movie about spiders and then you're going to be itchy for the next week. In other words, the next time you pose hands, you're going to be so pedantic about them that you might lose emotion in the face and everywhere else and totally forget about it. I would say this has got to be a slow progression of mastery in terms of the way we understand the way hands should be, but if you're so particular with them, you might lose energy somewhere else. So be careful that we're not losing everything for the sake of hands being perfect, but because we're focusing on it, you might over-focus on it the next time you shoot. So that'll be great. All right, let's keep on going. If you look at these hands on this particular side, now that left hand is a little bit stronger. As you can see, what she's wearing, the way she looks, her makeup, it's a bit edgier, it's a bit stronger. So therefore, I'm sort of running the fingers through the hair, or about to. That's why those fingers are a little bit curled in more than I would normally like. And then this hand is quite soft, as you can see, where she's framing her head, and that hand is very, very delicate. You see how it always ends up being onto a point like that? And that's how that works. Okay, in this case, we've got this beautiful hands covering up part of her face there, very, very delicate. You know, the lips are coming through there as well, and it's very, very soft. We can see the thinnest part of her wrist there as well. This next shot was pretty much like, what I wanted to emulate here was doing a fashion shoot. She wanted some body shots, and I'm thinking maybe we can do like a burlesque dancer having a cigarette break. And that's basically why we pose her like that. She's just resting her arm. And then as you can see, the hands are very delicate. That was when smoking was glamorous back then. If we're talking about, you know, burlesque shots from a bygone era or something like that, then smoking was cool back then. She blew out some smoke, and that's basically how we did that shot. For those people asking about how that was lit, that was photographed with a Profoto B1 with a 5-foot octobox. All right, let's keep on going. This one here in particular, as you can see, we've got a little bit of a gap here between her bust and her elbow, so that gives us some breathing space. We've got one foot in front of the other, which is really cutesy. The lighting is very flat, so it goes with basically the way her pose is, and even her smile. The hands are very delicate, sort of in there as well, and we're resting the elbow on here too. So what happens though, guys, when you're looking for emotive hands that aren't meant to be perfect, are not meant to be pretty? And that's why I always say that good lighting or good posing is either flattering or it helps communicate the message that we are trying to convey to the viewer of the photograph. Would you call these hands pretty? Would you say they break a few of the rules that we've been discussing? Well, yeah, they are breaking some rules. They're a bit heavy-handed, they're a bit rough, and they're a bit raw. But if you look at her, we're emulating with the makeup that she's been crying, she's an angry teenager or something like that. And that's why that's a perfect example of, I mean, they're still delicate to a certain extent, but because they're curled in, they're so strong, then that's why we are communicating with those hands. So, but now you can see, now let's contrast this photograph to something like this. Look at how delicate that is. Now, it's implied nudity, right? So you can, you almost see the naughty bits, so to speak. You've almost got like a bodice that somewhat could be seen in like in a Mad Max film. So there's almost like this oxymoron going on here. We've got hard light, hard highlights, hard shadows, really edgy particular bodice, but the way we're posing her is quite soft and it's quite delicate. I love the contrast, and I want to thank probably my biggest inspiration in photography, Herb Ritz, for really giving me this inspiration when I was a child. He was probably the first famous photographer that I knew about and I knew of, and it was wonderful to grow up with him. Unfortunately, he passed away many, many years ago, but he made photography so simple. It was so complex in execution, but so simple in the result. And I know that his work has rubbed off on me, because he used to shoot in the bright Californian sun and white backgrounds and do that hard, edgy contradiction with softness going through, and it's beautiful. So it's fun that every so often that, I said, yeah, my God, it looks such like a Herb Ritz photograph. This one as well, you sort of see how we've changed the bodice, and we've got hard sunlight again, we've turned her face, and then now we've got that, both her hands are very, very soft and delicate, framing her face, and we've got that beautiful gap between her chin there, we've got the gap between the arm there as well. Leg over as well is really, really important. When you look at these photographs, guys, by the way, I have no problem with bust, I have no problem with butts, either guys or girls. I just never really show the naughty bit below the belt, so whether it's guy or girls. I usually will try to pose it out, and if organically with the shoot that I'm doing, I can see maybe a little hint of crotch from a guy or a girl, and when I try to hide it with shadow or posing, but if it can be seen a little bit, then I'm going to shade that out or crop that out, because we want to keep something sacred for for them, and that's basically it. All right, but you see how delicate those hands are. Very, very soft hands coming right over both hands. You see the gap between those fingers, the graduation of that hand sort of coming up is just exquisite, and it's just fun. I find it very beautiful. People find it very daunting, but I find it's an art form. Posing female hands is actually, I'm trying to simplify it for you, but it's quite scientific when we break it down like this. But remember, trust your gut. Don't overthink it. Just communicate with those hands and it'll be beautiful. What about something like this? It was funny, you know, I was looking at this model and I don't know, she was thinking about something and it felt to me like she had a secret. I don't know what it was about her look. There was just something about her that made me feel that she was thinking about something else in almost a promiscuous kind of a way. So I sort of said to her, okay, let's pretend like we were just having a conversation and someone was about to come and we're just trying to hide, you know, what we're trying to say. And very gently, what happened was I said, interlock the fingers very gently and just put your finger up here as well. And that's what we did. I don't believe we actually filmed this particular shoot. So that's why I'm discussing it in more detail. Okay, let's keep on going. Now, this gives us a great example of if you don't overpose a hand, but it's out of focus and a little bit in shadow, it doesn't really matter. So let me explain a little bit more detail. You see how we're resting the chin on the actual palm there as well, and then we have breathing space and those fingers come up. But then you would say somewhat that hand, her left hand going on her body, flattens out a little bit, it's flat. And I basically have said in the previous conversations that we should really hide try not to photograph right flat onto the actual forearm on the back side. But because it's got a shadow and because it's out of focus, this was photographed at 1.4, you would say that you don't even look at it. Really, your eye's right on her face, on her hand, it's framing her beautifully. Her arm is somewhat against her body, because you can see the shadow on her bust there as well, but because she's so slim, she gets away with it. So that's why you've got to be really, really careful when you look at all these different things. Okay, the next one, all I can say is the next model was very, very inappropriate with me after the shoot. That's all I can say. You may have seen this before. This was, how beautiful does my wife look there? This was part of her 40th birthday present, a shoot. And you can see this is a very, very, very classic pose that we all have done. Sometimes we tend to miss one of those hands in terms of what it is. But this one's framing her face. Really, it's all about her expression in her face. This is a very, very standard pose. We discussed this before, right? Like the way you remember how to pose female hands, you grab the hands, put them on your bicep, then roll the wrists in, and that will remind you on actually how to put hands on a bicep, but roll them in, roll them around, and we get those beautiful shots. Lisa, one of our closest friends, she's a gorgeous girl. We've grown up with her. We've literally seen her blossom from I think a late teen, would you say, baby?
Yeah,
from the first time we shot her.
I'm pretty sure.
Late teenager, just raw, stunning beauty, real curves, all that stuff. And we've photographed her frequently. So she came back, she was traveling through LA, we were shooting there at the time. We got this beautiful gown and we put it basically over her face. I almost wanted, her expression is quite overly dramatic. I sort of wanted a little bit of pain in the shot. And I want to say pain, not painful as in a painful pose, almost like the Madonna, being saddened by an event or something like that. And there's some beautiful hands coming sort of back in, framing her face. We've got the beautiful curve in her body, and life is good. Also, now, this next shot, you may remember, this is from the Nikon D850 campaign, and you see how delicate those hands are. So because her hair is quite tight in that particular photograph, I couldn't put her fingers through her hair like I did with the other girl with that stringy sort of curly hair. I put it on top of her head, and then we grab the other one on top, and then there's a beautiful softness. Do you see the fingers sort of come down? How important is it that there's a gap between her elbows? The more highlight shadow you see in any kind of an image, the deeper and more three-dimensional it basically looks. If you look at this closely too, look at that beautiful little sliver of light on the other side, on the right-hand side of her cheek, which I think is just exquisite. And we've cropped her face perfectly in the middle, and life is good. Beautiful curves, standing up straight, chest out, and she looks stunning. Same model, same D850 campaign. This is a different location. You see how we've pointed toe, bend the knee, we arch the back. We've got the right hand on the actual chin, very, very delicate on her face. Then we've got that slight little bend of the elbow and that slight little bend of the wrist there as well. And there's this beautiful flow. Again, always when you think of posing, when you think of lighting, I often reference posing and lighting to just water. It flows organically, it's effortless, it's beautiful, and it just works. Any questions or thoughts, baby? Everyone's good?
Yeah, we're soaking it all in here. I think that one of the most interesting things in being able to see all of these different examples is seeing different people, different body types, different poses, different environments, and it makes it look so easy. And I know that it's not. So the key is definitely getting out there and practicing and trying out and seeing what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So can't wait to see some of those practice sessions.
Awesome. Now, so brain surgery to a brain surgeon is easy, right? So think about it. Anything can seem complex when you don't know it, but if you ignore it, you'll never master it. So the fact that you guys are playing and trying and you're trying to improve and you're growing with me, I love that. So there was a lot of new examples. I'm going to show you a handful of oldies but goodies, as I call them. This one, you can see how delicate that is, just framing the face just beautifully. And then you've got the same girl with her wrists together, framing her face as well. And then she had such long limbs, she almost looked like a swan. And basically, I needed to add some curves, so we put her booty towards the camera, and then we actually did this and framed her face there beautifully. And even in this case, you see how her hand is very, very delicately right around her hair. I deliberately pushed her elbow, right her arm, and then push her bust out because gorgeous girl, she's got a beautiful figure, but she's got quite a modest, small bust. And I wanted to add a little bit of cleavage, so I deliberately pushed her arm up against her bust and sort of did it that way as well. And there's so many ways that you can frame a face with hands. I mean, it's absolutely endless. The gaps between here and here, that beautiful S curve in both ways, it's almost like an infinity symbol. Being able to just rest one of the arms on the knee, bring the knee up so it's easier, bring that elbow right on the forearm, and then of course we sort of soften there as well. And you can even almost pretend like you're trying to hide light. You know, when you sort of look to the sun, you're sort of doing this, for example. That can often work, even if you're doing detail shots. You know, this one here, it almost looks like she's adjusting her earring and she's just putting her arm down. That's a slight little sort of bend there as well. Speaking of Lisa, this was photographed during a workshop, and I literally put her in a pocket of sunlight on the ground, yes, on the ground. And again, we see a different way of framing the face here as well. All right, we could go on. You sort of see how many, like you sort of see what I'm talking about, guys. I was breaking down hand posing and looking at all these new examples and breaking it down so much so that we give you enough examples to work with, and not only showing you specifics, but giving you the principles behind all these different things as well. We're talking about hands for detail, hands on detail, like let's say if the bride or the girl, the model is holding something, let's say she's holding some jewelry, different parts of her dress and things like that. Because many times it might feel mechanical to the model, the subject, and it might actually, you feel like you're directing it mechanically. What you've got to do is, like, sometimes I just get my subjects to pose their hands in their own way, but posing hands, I will almost always go up and adjust hands. I relax fingers, I relax hands, I might shake the fingers out and then guide them on a part of the body, and so on and so forth. So in this case, this is a beautiful wedding, Mike and Christine, right?
Yes.
This is
In
also
Italy.
a wedding. So this is a wedding we photographed in Rome. Love the way she's got half her face hidden by her hair. And then now we've got a somewhat boudoir-y shot. And this is a great way of, you know, a nice little sexy shot, but showing off the ring, perhaps, which would also help with the understanding of, in terms of posing organically with, you know, hands with rings and things like that. Look at how beautiful her hand is here, holding her veil. and she's resting her elbow, it goes back in. Again, it's effortless. We don't even pose the hands, it just drops. Hands will never do that because there's tension in your hands. You just got to relax it a little bit and think of reasons to bring the arms off the body. The arms on the body, but her bust is hiding that issue. And then that is just a beautiful softness there, beautiful little, beautiful background there. This is the Spanish steps. And I wonder if in Spain they have the Italian steps. That's all I'm saying. All right. Thank you for laughing at my jokes, baby. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yep, all good. Now, in this case, what we have is, this is photographed with the ice light, by the way. Do you see how her elbow's right out? She's stretching right out. Now, what can happen is if you're having a bride rest like this, the shoulder can go right up and it can look really weird. You've got to rest on the elbow, but just relax that shoulder. And if you can't relax it, by pure nature of the pose, even what she's wearing and her hair over her shoulder can soften that as well. And that hand goes back in. What do we say? Give her an excuse to do something with her hands. Very, very beautiful. The same shoot that we showed you before, but if you actually look at this, when we're talking about hands-on detail, that's very, very soft. It's very delicate. And what am I doing now, guys? Repetition is the key. When you're learning anything, repetition, experience, and practice is what we're doing right now. The more you see things, the more it'll go in here, and you'll have these photographs burnt in your brain, and hopefully you'll never forget to pose hands. All right, now this one, you see that we're giving her an excuse. This arm is up against her body, so just to show, this arm is against her body, and then she's just doing this with her hand. Now again, if I had a second shooter, for example, and they photographed from that angle, you know, the angle that's completely on like that, it wouldn't look as good. And that's why I don't really, among many reasons, I feel like a second shooter is almost superfluous because you've got so many different angles of a story that you already know that you're getting. And don't get me wrong, at the ceremony, reception life is good for having second shooters and so on, but I find the rest of it, you should be photographing, you yourself as an individual, be photographing for the wedding album or for the portrait album, and it should be nice and easy and effortless. Okay, let's have a look at this shot. You sort of see how we've got that very delicate hand over here, that very delicate hand over there as well, and that's a beautiful S curve, whether it's an inverted S or whether it's it reads correctly, but it all is very, very beautiful. This shot, what are we trying to say in this photograph? Now look at what she's wearing. Look at her posture is so perfect. So what I'm trying to do here is, this is really, really meant to be royal. We're saying she's royal without her cape, without her, without the embellishment of this, I don't know, lion mane or whatever you want to call it. But you can tell that she's missing her cape in some kind of a way. So these hands, they're delicate, but her posture is so royal. That left knee is bent up. So remember that usually the knee that's close to the camera is the one that you want to bend. That's going to create the most amount of shape. And how important is that little triangular little piece of gap there, that little light traveling through, shot with the ProPhoto B1 with the softbox. Usually when I'm shooting with a ProPhoto B1 with the softbox, I'm usually shooting with a reflector of some kind on the other side. And for those of you who've just, by nature of what we're doing right now, if you've asked me what kind of modifiers do I use, although I use ProPhoto strobes, I actually use Westcott reflectors, Westcott softboxes and everything. They're more affordable, they're just as strong and durable, if not even stronger, and they're fantastic. People talk about V-flats and things like that. So Westcott have a cool Scrim Jim Cine, and what it is basically a bracket that holds a 4x6 scrim, a 4x6 glorified V-flat, and you can tape things on there, like you can tape a silver reflector, white reflector, diffuser, whatever. And if you're looking at any of those, make sure, as a member, in case you don't know, jump on the members discounts page, not now, you don't want to interrupt the broadcast right now, go onto the About section of the menu, and then click on member discounts. And once you've actually logged in, a promo code will reveal itself and you can get 10% off anything off that store. So check that out. All right, let's keep on going. This one here, of course, what I'm trying to do is the elbows and the arms are probably pressed in a little bit more than I would normally like. She gets away with it, she's very slim. But what I do is I push her up. I want to hide basically her nipples. I don't want to show her nipples in this case, so it's implied nudity. And then the arms are pressed up to cover up her bust, and then the actual hands are framing that beautiful frame on her face there as well. This too, do you sort of see how we've got, she's very slim and she's wearing, she's covering up her arms, so putting up her arms against her body wouldn't be a problem for her, but you can see it now, the form of communication, there's this sort of softness, almost, dare I say it, a vulnerability, but a little bit of sexiness too. It's sort of that voyeuristic little peep out, and her expression's certainly doing that, but her hand is helping that expression. So just be wary of all those things and make sure we follow along as well. So hands on body is such an important thing, hands on detail, pardon me. This is probably my favorite bride that I've ever photographed. And so rather than get a bouquet of flowers, that's just a bit too pretty for us and for Melissa. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't call Melissa pretty, I would call her beautiful and sexy, and edgy. So I wanted something to really, to enhance that. So we bought her an Alexander McQueen clutch. We thought, wouldn't it be cool to actually show off the clutch with this kind of shot, resting her face and her chin on there, and then framing her face with the engagement ring here. Now, you see how it's more organic. The actual diamond ring is sort of facing where her finger's facing. I probably could have just turned that ring a little bit that way to see a little bit more, but I was too obsessed with her eyes and pretty much all of her to pay attention to those smaller details in that particular photograph. In this case, you see that shooting at 1.4 is just so delicate and so beautiful. And then if you look at all of this, what's going on, it goes in from soft to a little bit more of plane of focus, a little bit deeper here, which is just beautiful. But you see that nice little triangle, that little air between those hands and the forearm and the elbow and the shoulder, and the hands are repeating, and repetition is harmonious, and it can look quite beautiful. Adjusting these things, so this is a perfect example of how I like to do detail shots, where you're seeing the detail in the environment that it's in. You're seeing the ring, the bracelet, the earring, much nicer, much more beautiful, much sexier than just having it sitting on a table, in my opinion. That's why I do not show the kind of detail shots that I do not want to do on my website. I want to show the kind of detail shots that I want to do, no problem, within my albums and all those different things, and therefore I get those kind of clients that want that kind of stuff there as well. All right, so have a look at this. How beautiful are those hands? How beautiful is that hand? How delicate it is. Hands, in everything that we've been doing so far, wouldn't you agree that the hands look natural? Like it could have literally happened exactly the way we've been doing it. How would she have held this naturally? She would have held the top of the actual coat hanger. She would have held the dress maybe flat underneath. You probably wouldn't even seen her hand. So what do? I pose the hands in a way that is quite effortless and delicate. Yes, I've posed them, but it looks organic, it looks natural. And then we get the reaction. If you want to see Abby in action, Luke and Abby is one of our favorite weddings that we've photographed. If you go on to JGBT, look at episodes, look at weddings, click on Luke and Abby, you would see this entire coverage as well. This is also a shot that we took. Having been married for many, many years, I know how most girls put perfume on. Some people do the spray and then walk in, like, and then, so you got to make the sound, it's more fun. Or some people will actually, some girls will spray on the wrist and then do this. And then of course, we just happen to have the angle and the wrist sort of bent to where we want them as well. All right, where are we at? How are we going for time? I know we went a little bit.
So we're about 5-10 minutes from an hour.
Okay, all right, fantastic. So what I'll do now is I will talk about hands on body. We'll finish up with that. So hands on body. So I mean, we've actually discussed that a little bit. I mean, you would say that's on her wrist, but what do you do when her hands are on the body in different ways? So let's discuss it. Let's go through it. Hands on body. Where do you put them? Well, of course, in this particular case, I'm after a bit of a silhouette. I didn't want her hand dangling down doing nothing. So I put it basically like her wrist, right on her knees. So there's a nice little repetition there, a little gap between her legs. So we've got air between her body parts. So we just know where everything stops and starts. And again, same girl that we discussed earlier. And you sort of see how we've got a perfect excuse to show off the rings as well. Usually what girls will do when you're posing hands, they will grab things just very sort of abruptly. It's like this. It's like holding, like, hey, hold your hair. It'll be like this. It'll be like that. You sort of just got to grab the hands, roll the wrists around, and don't be afraid to go up and touch hands. See, when you're working with, especially guys, especially when you're working with any female, I believe it's very, very comfortable that shoulders, arms, elbows, forearms, hands, a very safe area to touch. Faces, I will only direct and touch if I've gained enough trust. I even ask permission. Sometimes I won't ask permission to just tilt a face, but then sometimes I'll be very, very delicate and I'll just move the face. The rest of the body, I don't normally touch the body at all, just get them to mirror me and so on. This photograph, how delicate is that to just basically have that hand just very, very gently on the top of the bust. It's very, very sexy, very sultry, very beautiful. And then we've got the face up, light falling on her beautifully. Got that beautiful cheekbone, and life is good. Now, this photograph, when we talk about communication, you would say she's a young girl. She's a teenager. So the way she's got her hands, it's very young. It's very delicate. It's not over the top. It sort of suits her. And it's amazing that when you start adding a bit more, this is a different girl, but when you add more dramatic lighting in this case, I said, I want you to just adjust your hair and put your hands right through your hair and sort of flow it down and bending her wrist. See, when you're doing fashion, if you just say to the model, okay, dance, do what you do, go, great, done, fantastic, hope for the best, and you'll shoot 3,000 shots and maybe you might get a handful of really good ones. If you are photographing a fashion model, my suggestion to you is this, is start somewhere. Find the angles of her face that's best. Usually that's determined by if the nose is crooked or not, if the one eye is bigger than the other. But usually most models normally have a symmetrical face, so life is good. But you really want to get them to know where the light's coming from, because if they pose out of the light, that's going to be an issue. But I quite like the idea of getting to understand what their model is capable of. So start directing a little bit. Give more freedom, give more freedom, give more freedom. Then you'll find they'll loosen up, and then you'll find you're working with a graceful model who knows how to move. And then what I personally do is I will sometimes let go, see what they're capable of, and every so often, love that, but turn this way, chin up, love that, keep the energy up, bang, and then go from there. Perfect example is something like this. Now, this was a hair flip. I love it because it almost looks like she's falling, but those hands are so delicate. You see how they're just very, very, very gently, sort of slightly bent, and they're just resting on her thighs, and then she's just flicking her face upwards. We've got broad lighting on her. She's a very skinny girl, but it actually works well for her. Quite beautiful. So hands on thigh as well. Do you see that beautiful bend, that beautiful bend, that beautiful bend? And then we've got a gap between the legs there as well, shooting on the short side of the face, catch lights in the eyes, negative space. Here, I position myself way on the right-hand side to get rid of the window, and so I don't get distracted by the window light. And I'm sorry, because I find myself just as a teacher, it's in my blood. I can't just talk about hands. Sometimes, every so often, I've got to talk about other things that are part of that shot that will help you too. Okay, this one, do you see how the elbows are bent slightly out and the hands go back in? Again, you see that the hands, the wrist is never straight. There's always a bend in that joint, and it's just very delicate. Even if it's soft there as well, it's incredibly important. This is also from the Nikon D850 campaign. You see how if she had her elbows right into her, it would just not work. The fact that we've got the elbows out a little bit, the hands sort of go back in, she's shifting her butt a little bit to the right, so it creates some movement in her body, in her butt, and then we turn her face until we do not see her nose. In this case, I just wanted a hint of her jawline, and of course, how important is it that we have that chandelier in the middle of those frames there, and then everything is just framing her. It almost looks like a butterfly, or angel wings, or whatever it may be, but there's a lot of method to that madness. That was just recently published in, what was that magazine again?
Digital Photo Pro.
Digital Photo Pro.
So the current issue of Digital Photo Pro that's on newsstands right now, Jerry's image is on the cover, and there's this great feature inside, like multi-page, great article, great interview. So next time you guys are at a store, try and pick that up. It's a really informative article. How precise you were about this image and how long you took to compose it, to get it just right. And how I remember you told me that you didn't even want to breathe because you would like move the camera out of position.
Yeah.
So it was pretty awesome to watch that come together and see how specific you were to get it right in camera. It's pretty awesome.
No, thank you, baby. It was tough because my main thing is that, and the whole idea behind the shoot too was that you can shoot at high resolution, but not on a tripod. So it would be easy to set it up on a tripod and be done, but that wasn't the nature of the brief. I had to be handheld, and that little gap was the bitch. Can I say that?
Sure.
I'm going to say it. That's just who I am. I'm sorry. That was the bitch to try to achieve that balance, as well as actually frame it sort of nicely in all other ways as well. Now, let's talk about this kind of a shot. You sort of see that she's got slim arms. It's flattened towards the light. And I would say, now that I've brought that to your attention, you might say it's a little bit flat. But what did I say? Lighting is either flattering and or it helps communicate the message you're trying to convey to the viewer. So in this case, there's a nice little delicate sort of vulnerability. We're shooting boudoir here, right? We're shooting almost through a lover's eyes, and this is almost welcoming. So I'm not being too pedantic to tell the model, well, bring the elbows out. And sometimes if I did this shot with the elbows out, this would look weird, even from this angle. If I did not want that to look weird and I had to bring it out because she wasn't as slim as this girl, then I would lean the upper body towards the camera, and that would soften that as well. Speaking of boudoir even more, like if you're doing with a naked figure, for example, the problem that I see is that when people are photographing, let's say nudes, and you want to cover up the bust, you don't want to show the naughty bits, and you've got the hands, girls will tend to just be like overly modest and do this and squeeze the bust, and it's going to look a little bit weird. So what I do and what I suggest is I'll say, look, just relax the hands and just like don't cup the bust. All I want you to do is just put your hands on your bust, let your hands sort of just flow over the curves of your bust, and just relax. Relax those fingers, and then if there's a problem still with the hands, Melissa will go up to the girl and adjust her hands on her bust, and life is good. All right, we're going to finish up with a couple of shots here to end our presentation today. This one just reminds you, doesn't that remind you of the kind of pose that we did for that Nikon D850 Gold shot? This is basically the light that's coming through is giving us that beautiful angel wings effect. It's got that light filtering through. This is what I call a detail shot of the back of the dress, but it's a dreamy quality, and that beautiful gap between the elbows and the arms and the body is incredibly important. Similar to that girl that we showed you before about putting the arms up. This is Bethany, Luke Edmondson, you may know him. Luke and David Edmondson, some very dear friends. Dare I say it, my chosen family. There's few people in this world that we choose to be our family that were not blood. And I had the privilege to photograph their wedding 8 years ago or so now. Bethany would, when she laughed, she'd just put her hands together and she would do that same thing all the time. And that reminds me to basically tell you guys that when you are photographing someone, if you don't let someone be themselves, then they're not going to see themselves in those photographs, which means they do not like those photographs. They can be technically perfect, but we're missing emotion. We have to sometimes sacrifice the perfection for the emotion. Personally, I just want both for you and for me. And when I say perfect, there's no perfect way. And again, if you've heard me teach before, you know what my definition of perfect means. My definition of perfect is the execution of my desired result. My desired result is I want soft arms, soft, beautiful, delicate, and also emotive. In this case, she's very slim. She gets away with it. You would dare say that I'm squaring her up a little bit, but she laughed into that pose. Therefore, I was totally happy with it. In this case, if you've been a loyal member of the ICE Society before JGPT, you'll know that over 10 years ago, this was the very, 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 very first shoot that I ever featured. We shot there again in our 5-year anniversary, but you'll remember this particular fashion shoot, Les Habitudes, or how would you say that in French, baby girl?
Les habitudes.
Les habitudes. You said it so sexy. I'm like, I don't feel like I want to say anything anymore. This was at Les Habitués. And then we did this shot as well. Very delicate hands. That tilting of the face is beautiful. Then we've got strength. So in this case, I showed you earlier, actually last week, about hands on hips. And often what I told you last week is that I want those hands to be literally that little curve to run into the curve and bring attention to the thinnest part of the waist. The hands on the thickest part of the hips actually makes her look wider. She's so tiny, I wanted her to look a bit hippier. Is that a word?
Yeah, I mean, it can be.
A bit hippier.
It makes sense.
A bit hippier. And that's why we did that as well. So remember, guys, hands can be so emotive. You just have to play. If you look at a photograph and it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. There's something wrong with it. Now that I'm paying so much deliberate attention to hands, it's very hard to unsee. What am I trying to say? You are no longer ignorant. And when I say ignorant, again, I apologize if that sounds brash, but I was ignorant. When I started out, no one ever taught me. I had no idea how to pose hands. I just like, well, that feels right, or that's okay. Or I just totally ignored it. Most of us, what we'll do at a wedding especially, we'll put the bride's arm around the groom, hold the flowers all day with the bride's hand there like this, and then we have two less things to worry about. But you're missing a valuable source of communication with all those shots that we're saying. You will only ever get better with something if you focus on it. With hands, people are fearful. What do I do with hands? As we discussed, there's been so many ways that we can pose female hands. And we are going to talk about hands-on partner right now. So really, what do we do when we're posing female hands on her partner? And now, pretty much all of my cases are on a male, but it would make no difference if it's female on female. It's just depending on what you're trying to say. Is it going to be like communication? Is it going to be some soft? Is it going to be emotional, sexy, passionate, whatever it may be? Hands on groom in this case, but of course that can be translated on hands on partner. So this is it. What are we getting at? How can we communicate with our hands? And as I've already discussed, guys, that generally speaking, most of us, when we're unsure how to pose hands, we get the actual bride to hold her flowers with one hand and have one hand around the groom or the bride, and then all of a sudden we have two less things to worry about. I'm saying you're losing a very valuable form of communication, and that is hands. Look at how passionate, and guys, do not look here. Look at this area where the hands are. Look how passionate those hands are. The hands are being mirrored, so usually there's harmony and repetition, of course, and when you've got these two hands gently repeating with a gap between them, it really is amplifying what we're basically trying to say. And of course, we're loving the groom, we're caressing the groom, and all those kinds of things. Let's keep on going. So again, I've established the foundation on how to pose hands. The quick lesson is you don't want to actually see this part of the woman's hands. You don't want to see this part. It should be this part or this part. So, and also everything has to be bent, and the fingers can never be straight, and we don't want fingers all close together like this either. We need breathing space and nice little luxury. So that's the quickest lesson on posing hands that we've given you, but to basically remind you on how we're actually doing this right now. Let's keep on going. So in this particular case, by the way, this was all natural light coming through a doorway of a studio, in fact, and if you can sort of see that all of those principles that we discussed are very much there. They're very, very delicate. It's a contemporary portrait. Her arms are off her body, a little of a gap between her arms there as well, and that beautiful delicacy, and also the way he's holding the hands is quite delicate. You would say that his hands are almost feminine, but because it's being hidden by the girl's hands, it's meant to be delicate. So this is not masculine on a guy on his own. It's actually all about her at this stage and that delicacy of those hands. This wedding is a beautiful wedding. This wedding will be featured in upcoming episodes on JGPT. So you'll see this very shot much, much more being featured. But do you see how the hand's on the chest? Now, it's really, really funny. When I started, the traditional way, or what was popularized 25 years ago on how to pose hands on a chest, it was this hand on like this and pointed, which doesn't really make sense because although there's a delicacy to it, you don't really do that in real life. Now, you don't really pose it in real life either. So why do we pay attention to all these things? Well, it's because we want to communicate. We want something that's got a bit more luxury, a bit more meaning, a bit more flavor. And we want to start with flattering every part of the body. And then when you evoke emotion, if it breaks the perfection of those hands, well, that's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with forgetting about hands because we're just lazy. If we're ignorant as we don't know any better, that's fine. We're trying to help you. So you now have the power and you can purposefully pose hands as well. In this case, her hands were quite stiff. And I just said, just delicately, just adjust them like this. So often I get people to mirror me. So when I get people to mirror me, if I look at her and put my own hand on my own chest and say, just relax those hands, then she knows exactly what to do. And now we've got a bit of tenderness there. And of course we have the bending of the wrist, a little gap between the fingers, and life is good. Now, just while we're here, his hand, do you see how it's not covering up the thinnest part of the waist? And at the very least, it's mirroring it. So when we'll remind you when we're talking about posing groom's hands, but we want to be very, very careful that we do not get his hand and cover up that beautiful thin part of the waist, the small of the back, because then it's a waste of a waist, if that's anything to talk about. All right, let's keep on going. Catherine Hall, you may know, she's a great photographer, a great friend of ours as well. This was part of her engagement portrait. And you can see how she's leaning on that sofa and bringing her elbow up and then just delicately draping her hand down. Now that's free hands. This one, if I had her hand coming out over here, or if it was too bright, I would say it would be distracting that it's coming out of his head. Now, is the hand coming out of his head? Yes, but it's dark and you can hardly see much of it. Therefore, I'm totally okay with that. Again, guys, you've got to work on instinct. With any kind of photography, any kind of rules, in fact, like I've always say, they are not rules, they're not absolutes, they are common denominators. We're saying most of the time this will work, and if your gut is telling you, well, this is okay, this goes against Jerry's rules or anyone else's rules, but it actually looks really good, go with it, trust your gut, go with it. As you become more sophisticated, your tolerance level for, let's say, poor photography, as in, say, a wine drinker to a cheap bottle of $2 Chuck, for example, that's not good enough anymore. As your level of sophistication and mastery grows, then you will be less inclined to accept, say, lazy or poorly posed hands, among many other things as well. All right, let's keep on going. Now, you see how we're photographing at the back here. I think many times we get the bride to bring her hand down here doing nothing. So this hand's doing something, it's delicate, it's caressing the groom's arm, there's a beautiful delicacy about it. This one here there's a few things. If we didn't tell the bride to hold him, then you would just see the hand doing nothing, and therefore I disbelieve that left hand because this hand's doing nothing. First of all, the arm has to come off the body to give us breathing space to basically see the thinnest part of her waist so she looks beautiful. She does. If we bend the elbow up, automatically in your mind, you're drawing that hand going back into the body, so she's actually hugging him with that right hand. And of course, we get that beautiful waist as well. So from many perspectives, they work. And again, that was very, very purposeful. There wasn't any fluke as to how that basically happened. Same shoot. Now, in this case, you see how I've got the outer hand over the other one. In this case, I'm shooting over his shoulder, so I'm pretty much getting both hands. If, let's say, for example, let's say I'm the bride and I'm putting my hands over the groom's shoulders. If I do it this way, as in you're the camera angle and we're like this, I'm amputating both hands. So if you're getting a bride to put the hands over the groom's shoulders, do this. And if this is too high and you can't see a gap between here and here, you get the guys to lean upper bodies towards the actual camera. And that's the way it is, but never do that. In this case, I not only have this over, but you can see both hands because my angle is actually a bit more over his shoulder. Oh, pardon me. And that's basically it. You can see how also, for the nature of what we're doing here, is that this is also a beautiful pose to do in the sun, because this was bright, full sun, and how do you work it, how do you do it? And in this case, it actually worked really well. All right, let's move on. Now, you can see in this case, I love it because we have two windows, obviously the brighter one over here and the less brighter one over here, so we get a hint of that light, that masculine light, that split lighting on him, the beautiful soft light, that warm smile. That left hand is basically saying what her soft smile is. She feels protected, she feels beautiful, and life is good. Now, because her body is in shadow, I'm prepared to sacrifice not exposing the thinnest part of her waist. First of all, she's very thin, you can see it very easily. But we want perfection and emotion. And again, let me remind you what I believe perfection is. Perfection for me is an execution of my desired result. My desired result here is not only do I want to flatter her, but more so, he's passionate. So he's going to draw his wife's body right into him, which means that I might sacrifice the waist for that hand being passionate. So again, hands posing is about flattery and communicating a message to the viewer of the photograph, which in this case is, of course, is you. This one here, do you see that right hand over the left? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Do you see how we've got a gap between the chin and the actual shoulder? Quite obviously, because she's shorter, so we get more space. And then we've got that right hand over the left. If we had it the other way, then that, again, that would be an issue. We'd have two amputations and that would be a problem. By the way, you see how she's arching her back. You see how he's drawing her body close and exposing the thinnest part of the waist. If he just wanted to grab her and draw the body close like we did before, I'm okay with it as long as she still looks thin and it also expresses that beautiful emotion. Okay, so perfect example here. She's very thin. In fact, the thinnest part of her waist is actually in shadow, but he's drawing close. But again, do you see how even it's proven that she's got a gap between her fingers because even that little pocket square is being shown in between the fingers. Was that purposeful? Not really. It was more just, hey, just put the hand on the chest, relax the fingers, and then I got them in motion, and then that happened organically. And of course, we got beautiful expressions and all that kind of thing as well. Let's keep on going. So if you look at this one, do you see how that hand is draped across? Even though that we're pretty much showing this part, there is a beautiful movement to that hand and it sort of just comes up. We are seeing quite a thin part of the wrist and it sort of blends into the hand being flatter. For me, it's more than acceptable. It just works. Now, how did I get this shot? And I didn't use any flash. I didn't use a big reflector. In fact, I used the hole in the donut. I used the small reflector. That's the whole of the Omega Reflector 360. So what we've got here is we've got the sun hitting him on the side, giving us that really beautiful rim light on him, that little edgy light, that masculine light. He's hiding the sun on her, but then we have a reflector mainly hitting her, and you've got the offcuts on him. And that's how we basically got that shot, and that blends in. That's why you've got sort of warm light on top and then cool light sort of more to the bottom. And even though that she's got her hand by her side, there's a subtle little bend, and you do that by simply just asking, just bring the elbow back. When you ask a bride or a model, any female for that matter, to bring the elbow back, almost always the shoulder goes back as well. It's sort of, you very rarely just bring the elbows back like that. So just remember, elbows back, and then you can even bring the elbows in, and that's how you sort of get that subtle little bend there as well. So you see how they're very expressive. The hands are very, very expressive. I see this done incorrectly when the bride does this. It's like a claw. It's almost like we're trying to grab him and, holding him for ransom or something like that, and kidnapping him. So we don't want this. This is a bit aggressive in a bad way. This is soft and tender. This one here is all soft and delicate. She actually just grabbed the lapel of the groom, and it looked quite beautiful. And of course, I'm framing them in the foliage, and that becomes a sort of a natural vignette there as well. The arm is off the body, so it doesn't look flat, and life is good. Baby girl, talk to me, girlfriend.
If you go back a couple of photos,
yes.
I don't know if that's possible.
Which one?
Yeah, further back. Back. That one.
Okay.
Did you slump her shoulders on purpose? Like, did you have her pose her shoulders like that specifically? Or was that just how the pose happened?
That happened organically. So I basically asked the girl here, I go, bring your arms over the shoulder of the groom. And so it's 50-50. Sometimes I'll do it like that, sometimes like that. So when she put the shoulders up, I can't remember, but I think it was the incorrect way. I said, swap hands like this. And she's just relaxing her shoulders. It just comes naturally. Now, some girls will do this. It will sort of just do that and a bit tense. So then what I might do is actually, hey, don't look at me. Just relax the shoulders. I give her like an idea of what it looks like and then how much better it looks relaxed. And then she'll relax them. And that's basically it. Let's go to the next photograph. Again, you see how delicate those hands are. The arm is off the body. We've got the shadow underneath the arm as well, so we know it's actually off. He's not covering up the thinnest part of the waist, even though that we can't see it. and that beautiful delicate hands there as well. This shoot, which was done in my father's hometown of Dimitsana in Greece, or as the Anglos will say, Dimitsana. But Dimitsana is the way we say it in Greece, and we've got this whole shoot that we'll bring to you in future episodes of JGBT as well. Can't wait to show you that as well. Really beautiful. Again, tender. Do you see how there's just a gap between the fingers? Remember, I wouldn't overdo it. Let them do it on their own first. As in, hey bride, hey Melissa, just put your hand on Jerry's chest. So it's like this, and it might just be a little bit flat. Then you might say, just relax your fingers, and if you do this, you'll very rarely actually keep the fingers together. They'll relax and then just bend them a little bit, just like that, and then you get that form of communication, that tenderness that we're looking for. Of course, if that's what you're trying to say. Let's keep on going here. Do you see how delicate this hand is? Obviously, we have this hand just right on the thigh of the groom. We'll come to that in a second, but you see the difference between a masculine hand and a female hand and how delicate that can be. But really, really beautiful. And what I love about this is you've got this beautiful, this curve here and mirroring this curve here. You've got a gap between the leg there as well, gap over here. You've got this beautiful little gap so you see the silhouette of their faces, and it's all framed by this beautiful ancient, I wouldn't call it ancient per se, but a few thousand-year-old buildings in this beautiful village in Greece. All right, let's keep on going, guys. This was done with off-camera flash, and you see how we discussed a couple of episodes ago that if you ever forget on how to pose hands, for those of you just joining us for the very first time, so remember, if you're doing this, okay, if you're at home right now, do this. Hands flat towards the camera as if I'm pointing a gun at you. Stick them up like the old Westerns. Do that. Put your hand flat on your bicep and now roll the wrists around. When you roll the wrists, this tells you how to pose a hand right here, if you want it, right on the joint, the elbow. It shows you how to pose hands on a forearm. It shows you how to pose hands on a bicep. That's either the bride's own bicep. It could also just be that she's holding maybe the veil like this and she's just bringing her hand on her veil like that, or it could be holding something of the groom, and that tells you what it's all about. All right, let's keep on going. This shot here, do you see how very similar to actually the shot quite a while ago? Let me just show you what I'm referencing here. So you remember this photograph, how most of her arm is in shadow and is hardly seen, so it doesn't worry me that I guess to the letter of the law it's coming out of his head, but you see how in this case, if you felt that may be an issue, that in this case it's right down and the elbow's right there and it comes right there and it's draping across and it's mirroring the beautiful shape of his shoulder, and it actually works well. Do you see how he has masculine light and then she has feminine light? And then you've just got this hand just very gently on the hip. If this was doing nothing, it would just be draping down doing nothing. So what you do is you might say, hey, relax your hand by your side and now slide your elbow up. And then that's how we would get that particular hand as well. All right, let's keep on going. This next one. This is meant to be strong. Who's subordinate here? He's subordinate to her. She's the queen. She's ruling. She's literally grasping at him. He's just there. He's just going along for the ride. So do you see how expressive these hands are? This is strong. It's probably stronger than I would normally do. This hand is a bit stronger again. Love the way he's supporting her here, but again, you can tell that she's the hero in this particular photograph. He's even got half his identity not even seen, and that little brow pressure, everything was asked for here. So when you see this actually shoot being filmed, you'll know exactly how we got there, but just to allude to it. In case you're wondering, how did I take this shot and how did I get beautiful detail over here? This was done with a Profoto B1. This was done with a 5-foot Westcott Octobox and with a Scrim Gym, 4x6 Scrim Gym Cine, which is also from Westcott. A lot of people will buy one of those big boards, 4x8 foot boards, from your local camera store or could be anywhere. And you can tape them together with gaffer tape and put them down, but they sort of flop and they tend to deteriorate after a while. The Scrim Gym Cine is awesome because it's 4x6 and you can Velcro anything you want to it. You can Velcro their They're calico material, so if you're doing video production and you want a slight little warm, you can bounce the light off the calico and it's got that soft, beautiful skin tone. You've got silver, you've got black, and so on. So the cool thing is you can also put it on a hinge and it's a sturdy frame that you can pack together, or you can expand and leave in your studio like that. So that's what's giving us that beautiful little detail. All right, someone whom you might recognize here, Ryan and Jessica Shembry. So again, do you see how that left hand is over the right, and then we're basically seeing that hand here cover up that little bit of a mess on the side there. You might look at his hand and say, well, those fingers are pointing towards the camera, therefore we're foreshortening those fingers, therefore it doesn't really look that good. Two things. One is, I think it's acceptable because it's in shadow, you can hardly see them. Two, I always said, remember, that posing is either flattering and or it helps communicate the message you're trying to convey. In this case, he's drawing really, really close the bride's body towards him, therefore it's communication. If I did not want that severe angle, all I would do is get them to twist their bodies more towards me. So again, I want you to think of posing hands, or anything for that matter, anything kind of a pose, as communication rather than just, I'm trying to make everyone look pretty. Otherwise, if there's no expression in those hands, then we've lost all the moment. All right, let's keep on going here. So if you look at this particular one, you see how there's that beautiful little bending of the wrists just here. And he's basically holding her. He's probably just covering up the thinnest part of her waist, but she's so thin, she's got beautiful shape. I think that's more than acceptable. Let's show you now the difference between flat hands and emotive hands. Let's look at this. So is that hand saying anything? No. We're photographing basically right there, and it doesn't look good at all. But now watch the difference. There and there. There and there. Huge difference. Now, in fact, what I'll do right now, I will put them side by side so you can see what's going on. And here's something I prepared earlier. Okay, so look at them side by side. There really, really is yeah, I mean, you've got to go for that one every single time. And that's what I'm getting at. It's funny because I've been really obsessed with posing hands for a lot of my career. And I went back and tried to find bad examples. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, by no means. But because I'm so obsessed with those hands, it was tough to find bad examples. But I will, in future sort of, I guess, shoots and things like that, I'll go out of my way to actually show you good pose, bad pose, and give you ideas on how to do that and actually be able to reference it in the future as well. Now, this is an exception to the rule. You see how the hand's quite delicate of hers. So his hand's quite emotive, just like this. And she's doing that, and she's pointing her wrist really towards the camera. Now, is that a bit of a no-no? Could she have lifted up her hand a little bit up higher? I would say yes. This is probably a good example that could have been posed a little bit better. So at the moment, again, relative, she's sort of like this. She could have been up a little bit and twist the wrist around. But I feel like it's so emotive with the faces and the hands, and it's still very, very thin there. I'm okay with it. So trust your gut. Like I said, I wouldn't go out of my way, well, that's a great pose, Jerry, let me just copy that next week. No. I'm giving you principles. I want you to stick to those principles and then only break them if it looks good. Now, how delicate are these hands? What are we trying to say in this photograph? Well, what we're trying to say is that she's basically, her fingers are kissing his lips just before she is. And that's what the hands are basically saying here. What are the hands saying in this photograph? They're saying, it's cold, let me comfort you, let me keep you warm, let me envelop you with my hands. It's emotive. How about this one? Now you would say that with this right hand covering up the thinnest part of her waist, but I accept it because look what she's doing with her hand. She's ripping his shirt off. That's very, very sexy. Even her arm is pressed up against her body. This is a bit of a no-no in my book. But does it communicate what I'm trying to say? Yes. It's raw, it's sexy, it's passionate. It's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to just be absolutely, unashamedly exactly what it is. All right, let's keep on going here. What time is it? Just want to check that we're going in the right sort of mold here as well. Check this one out. This one, this is Luke and Bethany Edmondson. Those hands are flat in the tummy. I actually pose them a little bit differently, but in the heat of the battle and making them giggle, the hands went a bit too flat. Now you might say, well, where do I put those hands? I would just try to avoid being center in the stomach, which somewhat it is. I just don't want to center those hands. Like if those hands were a little bit to the right, it almost looks like she's pregnant. Now, two things would be good for this shot. What I've already done, but maybe a bit more off, or more this way, and or turn their bodies a little bit towards me. The fact is, though, the light was coming from that direction, and that's pretty much where I put them for the light. You can see because I've got that beautiful shadow on her shoulders, her cleavage, and it actually works accordingly. What about in this case? In this case, she's just basically draping her arms right over, and this can look a little bit strong, a little bit heavy, and it may not feel right. I would say drape them on. Be careful that this area doesn't look too thick. That's an important one. And then place if you're doing a mash of hands, like 4 hands in a row, at least have the bride's hand, preferably with a ring, if you can remember, on the outer side. You know that game where, do you guys play that game with your kids? Like,
yes, yeah.
So if you're doing that, do that, but the bride's hand ends up on top. If the bride's arm is heavy, do that exact shot, but do this hand underneath the armpit of the groom, and that's how it'll work. Remember how we did this before, this particular pose? The left hand's beautiful and romantic, everything like that. That is nice. And again, this is quite flat to the camera, but I feel like it's still soft. It's expressing something. Bless you, by the way. And it works. This hand's very delicate. So you see the left hand caressing his face. The right hand, you would say, well, maybe, like in that position, because it's his chest towards the back, where would her right hand go? As in, I would say, if it's romantic on the faces, it should be romantic with the hands. But because the pose is so like chest to back, then it doesn't really make sense that her hand is, where is it going to be? You know, it might touch something naughty, it might go on his leg, it might look a little bit weird. So in this case, I'm using the framework of the environment to actually frame them. So the right hand is there, but I feel like it's okay based upon what else is happening. But when you get 2 hands saying what the face is saying, beautiful, romantic, lovely, gorgeous, whatever, and it's just delicate, then I believe everything. If one hand is flat or claw-like or something, then you are missing a very valuable form of communication, as I discussed. Again, same couple. Again, you sort of see how I've shown you a few poses like this. This would not make sense if she just turned it into... The more I look at it, I'm like, it's funny, I've formed a pattern with this shot. Why am I not bending the wrist too far? And even though I'm saying it's a form of communication, so therefore it's okay, but if I was to bend it, in fact, baby, come over here, let's do this. I feel like we need to explore this. Why, naturally, haven't I done this quite a bit? So at the moment, okay, so you're over here. Okay, so it's slightly over my shoulder. My hand is like this, and then put your hand on my wrist. Now, if you turned it, see how the hands, they've got nowhere to go. So if you want to see the thinnest part of this wrist, it actually wouldn't make sense. If you go lower, I don't know, that doesn't feel like it. See, this hand on the wrist is basically saying, I love where your hand is. I'm guiding a kiss. Therefore, this hand is saying, yes, I love that. Guide a kiss. I want that. So if we do it the other way, well, that would look silly. So I guess I've answered my own question. I've found a bit of a black hole anomaly with what I'm doing. But if it's too far bent, it looks like I'm posing hands, where this is basically saying, I just love you. So trust your gut and go with it.
Somebody, I think it was Stephanie, actually in the chat room said...
You got to talk to the microphone.
Stephanie in the chat room actually said that whole rolling the hands is one of the best pieces of advice that they've gleaned from these few episodes. It's
awesome.
Pretty awesome because, like you said before, like just knowing how to do that answers so many problems. Like that.
Yeah, do it again. There, bang, go in. Keep that hand exactly where it is, and there it is. Go again, and now put that hand on the bicep. Beautiful. Go again. Hold the bottle of water. Perfect. All right, awesome. Let's keep going. Again, same one. See that pattern is forming. I didn't even realize as I was actually doing this presentation that that's sort of a very obvious common denominator that I've broken. or now it's become a common denominator that if I turn the wrist too much, it would look a little bit weird. I could shoot from this angle for the wrist, but then I wouldn't get the face. So it feels like that's really the way to go. You see again how we did this. Melissa was doing this, and that's the hand on the wrist, exactly my position again. This is another one from Luke and Bethany from several years ago, but this I wanted to show you because when I made Bethany laugh, she would bring her hands together like this, and her arms will be on her body, and she would just giggle and laugh and crack up and so on. Now, that's her. If I start now, oh no, bring your hands off, bring your arms off your body, or it's just not going to be her. And I'm telling you, what a waste. And you've got to make sure that it's got to fit from the personality. You might get a very strong corporate CEO executive on her wedding day, and then you're trying to make her look all delicate. Now, I'm not saying go all the way rainbows and butterflies, nor am I saying actually, make her look very strong and masculine. No, you've got to don't just go too far, depending on the person that you're basically dealing with and photographing. People ask me all the time, and Melissa's probably going to kill me for this, but I want to say it anyway. How did I make them laugh like that? I said, because I knew that she was religious, her father's a pastor, and certainly Luke is, spiritual, religious, whatever you want to call it, but he has he can certainly have a bit of fun. So I knew that there was an innuendo there. I knew that they would laugh at innuendo. So I set them up. I've got their posing, and then I said, Luke and Bethany sitting in the tree. Fucking. And she went, oh my God! And she started looking away, and I got the shot exactly that I wanted, and I love it. So there you go. Don't try this at home, and if you do, it's not my fault. I love trying to make Joe giggle because he sort of giggles under his breath and the laugh comes out of his nose. It's really funny. All right, guys. Have I shown you enough examples of posing hands? Let's show you a couple more here. This one. Now, if you look at this, you see that now the bride's hand is like this, and you'd almost somewhat say that his hand is looking a little bit feminine. I would say perhaps here's the anomaly again. If he turned his hand, as in more towards me, it would look claw-like, you'd lose his fingers. So the more I look at this, I'm like, well, what other choice did I have as far as his hand is concerned? If it went a bit lower, that would look a little bit weirder. It'd distract the attention. His hand could be on the actual waist, but I wanted her chance to basically say, I'm guiding a kiss, and him to say, I like that where that hand is. So that's questionable whether you feel at home right now if that's too feminine or not, or masculine or not. And if you think it's too feminine for you, then just don't do it. This particular pose is great, especially when you have a bride who's plus size or plus size arms, because we get the veil covering up one arm, and then really, if I turn their body slightly towards me, you wouldn't even see her right bicep, even though it's being hidden and swallowed up by him. So this is a great pose if you want delicate arms and hands, if you've got a plus size girl. And remember, guys, hands are meant to be expressive. They're meant to emote. So if you're photographing the henna tattoos of a South Asian wedding, an Indian wedding, don't always just do this. As in, let me show the tattoos, because have I done it in the past? Yes. But do these show the tattoos but actually give me more emotion? Yes. And that's what I'm getting at, is I'm after hands with emotion. Now that brings me to a very, very strong finale to this 3-part series of posing female hands. And I guess I can't wait to show you what I'm about to show you, because even me thinking about it right now, I get goosebumps. In fact, if you go close enough here, I got goosebumps thinking about what happened during this following shoot. This was very recent. Now, if you know Europeans, I'm Greek, and I'm very expressive with my hands, as pretty much everyone is really, but it's sort of like a cliche, one of the European traits that you just talk with your hands. In fact, someone who talks with their hands a lot, if you know Sally-Ann Sargood from Animoto, I want you to, next time you speak with her, she's the funniest because she's a descriptive gesturer. So if you talk about like I went on a boat, and she'd go, oh, we went on a boat like this. So she's very descriptive. But when I say talk with your hands, I'm not talking about the way Sally does it, and she'll kill me if she's watching this or she rewatches this, but I'm talking about being emotional. I'm saying expressing so much more. See, when we said repetition, there's harmony in repetition, right? So when we start doing what our faces are doing with this hand and this hand, body language, everything is saying the same thing. You're causing an experience. You're tantalizing senses. Everything is basically becoming more soulful. So we photographed this beautiful family recently, and it's parents with 3 children, and they're very close friends of ours. And the mother, the wife, beautiful woman, but you can just see that, man, with 3 kids under the age of what, 5, 6? So 3 children under the age of 5 or 6, I think is just, being a mother, I believe, is the hardest job in the world. My hat's off to you if you're a mother. I can only imagine what it's like to be the rock of the family, because you have to be a wife, you have to be a mother, a daughter, a sister, and you have these little human beings that rely on you not to die, every day. But usually there's just not much left in the tank for you. And anyway, so we were doing this family session of every combination. So father, mother, whole family, kids on their own, kids together, girls together, guys, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, there was all this commotion. The kids are running around, as kids do. They were being very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like kids. They're toddlers.
They're being kids. I mean, they were being fun, but they were being...
rambunctious.
Oh, no. What's the word I'm looking for? Not obedient. Oh, geez, what's the word?
What are you trying to say, baby?
I'm basically trying to say good behaviour. There's a word that's just lost me. Anyway.
Well-behaved?
Well-behaved, let's just say that, yes. There's a word for it I was thinking of. Anyway, well-behaved children, but kids being kids. But you can imagine in the studio, they're seeing all these big lights, what's going on, whatever. So I just said, all right, everybody out. Lisa, stay in the studio. And so she did. Now, if you look at her, what is she saying with her body language right now? She's quite nervous, even though that we've known each other for a while. In fact, I've known her husband a lot longer than her, and I've only probably spent 3 or 4 times with her, but knowing that she's an incredible wife, incredible mother, and also she's a singer. She's a singer as well. But anyway, you could tell that being in a dark studio, as it was, and having a light on you, and all of a sudden everyone's being thrown away, you can see that she looks a little bit nervous, a bit anxious, and, oh, what's going to happen right now? Then I started to relax her a little bit. We started talking. And then she got a bit more relaxed. You can see, although, forget about posing hands at this stage, but thumbs out in a pose, whether it's a guy or a girl, suggests that I'm more relaxed. Not that I like it, and we'll come to that and talk about that at a different time. But then I wanted to relax her a little bit, so I made her laugh. And then I started giving her a little bit of direction, and this is pretty much the direction that I gave her. And I can't remember exactly, but it was something to the effect is that I want you to sing me a song. Now, if you're a performer, singing on cue is not that difficult because you're a performer, you do it all the time, you can sing on cue, but arguably it's probably even tougher to a 1-person or 2-person audience in a dark room. And I just said, sing me a song. I want this to be your moment. You know what? This is all about your family, all about the kids, everything. Every day is all about everyone else. Right now, I want this to be all about you. And she started singing. And you can see there's words coming out of her mouth. You can see there's a little bit more than just talking. She's singing. By the way, I happened to shoot this with a Pro Photo B1. There was a 4x6 Scrim Jim Cine on the other side, just a little hint of light coming on this side, and 5-foot octabox, just for those of you wondering. Not the point, of course, but just to let you know. And then as we started photographing, she's singing here. Now, these shots aren't that great. I did not capture a great expression, I've got to say. But she sang her song. So, do we have a hero shot yet, is the question? No. Why do you believe we don't have a hero shot at this stage? This is a grey Oliphant background. We had 2 lights here, I believe. We had 1 light from the top, 1 softbox from the top, 1 from the side for catch lights. Potentially, we may have had, I'm pretty sure we had a 4x6 Scrim Jim Cine on the other side there as well. We had our challenges.
The reason why it may not be a hero shot is because maybe her eyes are closed. She's not singing to an audience, so there might be limited connection to the viewer. She's not completely relaxed. Maybe she's singing a sad song. Her arms are down by her side. She's not using her hands.
All right. Can you emote? Can you photograph someone and create an emotional portrait with their eyes closed? My answer to that is absolutely yes. Yes, she's not quite relaxed. Yes, I agree with that as well. But the answer is the hands are not doing what the face is doing and what the voice is doing. Your physiology, is that what you call it, physiology? Mm-hmm. When your whole body gets into something, and you might think of some activities that right now that could be that you could be thinking of that does that, but when your whole body, your mind, your spirit, your body, your soul gets into it, it's an incredible experience. Probably an obvious experience that your whole body gets into is when you're cheering for the Vegas Golden Knights winning the second playoff series. But when you watch sports, everyone just freaks out and you scream your whole body, and that's why you can hear the roars from the other side of town. So I'm saying to you with posing hands, we're focusing on hands right now, but the whole body, mind and spirit that goes along with it, I am telling you, your photographs will be more soulful, more spiritual. There'll be more emotion, and that will ream out of a browser of a bride or of someone looking at a website to hire a photographer. Now, I can't remember the exact words that I said. I'll have to look back at the footage. But this is roughly what I said when after that song happened. So I said, oh my God, that was beautiful, that was amazing, all that kind of stuff. And I said something to this effect: talk to me with your hands, express yourself with your hands, assuming I couldn't listen to your voice. In other words, I want to know what words you are saying, assuming I was deaf. Just by your hands, I'm understanding the lyric. And I said, take your time, breathe in, relax. Can you think of a song? By the way, release the pain. Release the anxiety, because I saw it, often, and especially mothers, and again, I think you have the hardest job in the world, and my hat's off to you. The fact is that, especially when you have young children, that's a tough gig. She had her moment. This was probably just a little mini holiday for her, that she could just be all about her. And I said that, this is all about you. Don't worry about anybody else. This is your moment. I want you to pick a song that releases that pain and makes you refreshed by the end of it. And she sang Roy Orbison's Crying. Beautiful song. She sang it beautifully. But this is when I asked her to just relax and take a breath. Then before she started singing, she did this. Then she started singing, and then I can't believe how much more beautiful even the face is. And when I say beautiful, I'm not saying pretty, I'm saying how much more beauty came out of her because the hands were mirroring the face and giving almost the face permission to express herself. She lost her inhibition. She even sang more beautifully. Her tone was more beautiful. There was just this beauty that I haven't seen for a very, very long time. And you could see she's releasing it, that brow pressure. By the way, this is, every shot that you're seeing is straight out of camera. Nothing's been done to them. I photographed in black and white on my camera, obviously with RAW and JPEG. But the hands, look at them. Look at what's happening with her hands. Now she's performing, now she's releasing. Now she's crying, so to speak. She's mirroring that energy of the song. And it was an absolute joy to watch. It was a spiritual experience, I can't even tell you. But you see how even her face, I don't know, there's just something to it. And then even though that there's been, in my opinion, a lot of hero shots, the next one, I believe, is the hero shot for me that says everything. I can't even see her eyes, but that brow pressure, the hand on the heart, this hand almost in a fist, basically saying, I'm strong, but I'm vulnerable. If it was only strength and no vulnerability, no pain, it would be just like this. If it was out like this, you're welcoming something. But she could be releasing or she could be clenching. So for me, it's a combination of strength and vulnerability. This is, I mean this, my hands on my heart. Turning away from the light, that drama in her face, that light is absolutely full of beauty. Then she releases the peak, that note that's very tough to get. If I'm a closet singer myself, and the song that she was singing is a very tough song to get, and she hit that note, but you see what she's doing with her hands. She's feeling it. Like any symphony, there's highs and lows, and then we finally get to a point where she submits and she relaxes and she lets go. I can't even tell you guys how beautiful that was to watch. That was probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And now that I'm talking about it, getting emotional. Because I have so much respect for mothers. And the fact that she had her moment. We had a great conversation afterwards on it, and she said, no one's really given me that time. Even though that it was 10 minutes, no one has given me that moment to shine on my own, all about me, nobody else. Can we go to you, baby, for a second?
Yeah. I think that what was pretty awesome about that moment is exactly what Jerry said, because when we were all together doing the family session, because they've got 3 kids and, so Jerry's trying to pose them and we're getting them all together and kids are running over here and then we're giggling and we're laughing. And I was, of course, like helping to make them giggle and I was tickling them. But mom's, of course, trying to make sure that everyone's happy and that everyone's being obedient and in their right place. And so she was totally being a mom throughout. And I've actually never seen Lisa in any other mode other than mom mode, so I don't know how Jerry picked up on this or what it was. And they were there for a family session, but he did get individual portraits of everybody during a family session like he always does, but just couldn't get Lisa on her own being Lisa. And so that's when he kicked us all out. So I brought the girls next door, we started a movie, and even then it took a little while for Lisa to come out of mom mode because that's what moms do. And it was really interesting to see Jerry fight so hard to get Lisa to be completely relaxed and comfortable. And it was only later on that when we were comparing, because she did that first, when she first sang, and it was very calm and subdued, and it was almost like she was doing it because Jerry asked her to. She was singing because Jerry asked her to. And then Jerry said what he said, and he said, I want you to just sing to me, and I want you to show it as if I couldn't hear you. So if I couldn't hear your music, what would that look like? And so that's when she became more expressive. But it wasn't until way after the fact when we were comparing the shots from the first time and then the shots from the second time that we noticed that it was like a physical body difference that she had. Like there were physical body changes to her with her hands and her she stood taller and that kind of thing. So it was just a really interesting lesson for us as well. And that's why Jerry included it into today's program, because the hands were such a big part of that. And Jerry always says that the hands are the most expressive part of any pose that we do, but here was like a perfect example where we could see the before and after. So it was a really fun lesson for us to learn as well. It was pretty cool.
Thank you, baby. Thank you for the great summary. And if I could sum up this entire broadcast on how to pose hands, how to pose female hands, if you remember only one thing, right, this is your quote. Jerry, how do you pose hands again? my question to you, I'll throw it right back to you. Well, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say tenderness? Are you trying to say sexy? Are you trying to say passionate? Are you trying to say what Lisa said? Talk to me. You want to give permission to the people that you photograph to be more meaningful and more expressive. And although you're starting off with a mechanical structure, let the expression, the people, the faces guide you. If you've got someone, like I said, if you've got a guy who's burly and strong, then yeah, that'll be strong hands. And it's masculine, obviously. If you're talking about a girl who's very delicate, more princessy, then those hands should mirror that. Ultimately, we want to follow those principles that we discuss with you in a way that expresses something and also flatters the person. So we start off with the pose, which is flattery. Then the expression, if it breaks the perfection, it's okay, because you see with all those shots that we showed before, it wasn't about perfection. It was about saying something. So with that, I challenge you guys that now that I've put that extra slant on things, the next time you do a portrait session, why don't you actually say to the bride or the groom or the mother or the father, just with your hands, tell me how much you love your wife. Let's see what happens. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a really, really fun exercise for me personally, because it's something that I've been teaching for many, many years. But in the context of preparing this with more detail, because again, I wouldn't teach this 3-4 hour seminar as part of my workshop. I'll be wasting too much time. I want to give you sort of bits of everything. But in doing this, it's actually taught me how many things that I've actually developed over the years. And as I articulate it to you, it actually strengthens my resolve to make my hands, my female hands, any kind of pose, so that are more purposeful. So I wish you the same resolve.